Chapter 1001, Preparation 1. The sky was a tumultuous canvas of rolling thunderclouds, some hanging so low they seemed almost within reach from the tower's peak. Dazzling lightning bolts struck the vast black lake, startling an enormous octopus from its slumber. It thrashed its 8 massive tentacles, creating a flood that even submerged the upper hallway. On this first day of June, the ominous weather seemed to foretell that the final month of the school year would be anything but peaceful. An owl braved the storm, delivering a letter to Atticus Blaine from Remus. After reading the letter, a faint smile graced Atticus's lips. Mr. Weasley had written to inquire whether Percy's resignation from the Ministry of Magic and his decision to join the Learning Machine Workshop was influenced by Atticus's suggestion. In his reply, Atticus assured Mr. Weasley that it was not his suggestion, but he hoped they would respect Percy's decision if he had made one. Remus's letter also mentioned that Percy had successfully passed an interview at the workshop and sought Atticus's opinion on whether to recruit him. Atticus suspected Remus had sent a similar letter to Mr. Weasley. After penning his response, Atticus gazed out the window at the rain pouring down and addressed the owl perched by the fireplace, drying its wet feathers. "I'm heading out now. You can deliver this letter back to your master once the rain stops," he said. The owl hooted in understanding. It was class time, and the castle corridors were devoid of little wizards. Atticus stood in a corridor, watching the rain lash against the windows. He hesitated momentarily, choosing not to leave the castle through the main entrance. Instead, he walked along the corridor to a secluded area adorned with sculptures on either side. "Left-right separation," Atticus murmured as he reached the corridor's end. He drew his wand and tapped it against the hunchback stone statue of a witch. With a grating sound, the witch's hunchback opened, revealing a dark passageway. Before emerging from Honeyduke's cellar, Atticus cast a disillusionment charm on himself. As a professor, he couldn't afford to be as reckless as some of the younger wizards. The rain was relentless, and the streets of Hogsmeade were nearly deserted. Only a few villagers, clad in raincoats, were attempting to clear the clogged sewers. After casting a water-repelling spell on himself, Atticus stepped out of Honeyduke's and into the rain-drenched world. He walked along the central avenue for a while before turning onto a narrow road beside the post office. Within minutes, he arrived at the Hogshead Bar. The thunder's roar and the rain's drumming made the bar's conversations indistinct, but Atticus could still make out the voices. "You don't seem very welcoming, Aberforth," a gentle voice with a hint of laughter said. "Do you really expect me to welcome you?" replied another voice, gruff and irate. "If you want to play the pimp, Foley, go back to your underworld. Hogsmeade is my territory." "Oh, don't be like that, Aberforth. I'm not here to steal your business," Foley's voice remained smooth. "An adult requested to meet here, so I had to come." "To hell with your adults. Why don't you take your secrets to the Shrieking Shack?" Aberforth retorted. Atticus's lips twitched in amusement as he pushed open the door to the Hogshead Bar. It was daytime, and not an open day for Hogsmeade, so business was slow. Apart from Aberforth behind the bar, only Cacus Foley occupied the room. The sudden entrance of Atticus silenced them both. "It's you?" Aberforth glanced at Cacus before his eyes settled on Atticus, who wore a slight smile. "You made it. Do you have an appointment with me?" "Ah, good afternoon, Aberforth," Atticus Blaine greeted with a smile as he approached the bar. "Why do you seem less than thrilled to see me handling your business?" Aberforth snorted twice, clearly unimpressed. "If you want to talk to someone, why not meet in your office, Blaine? Or do you have a little secret you don't want the greatest wizard of the time at the school to know?" "If I wanted to avoid Dumbledore's notice, I wouldn't choose to be here, Aberforth," Atticus replied with a grin. "I just suddenly felt like having a drink, and the fire whiskey here is better than at the Three Broomsticks." Aberforth fell silent, casting a skeptical glance at Atticus, clearly not buying his excuse. "Come on, Cacus. Aberforth will prepare some drinks for us." Atticus gently patted Cacus on the arm, and the two of them moved towards a table farthest from the bar, understanding each other without words. Atticus removed his cloak, while Cacus took off his coat and draped it over the back of his chair. They sat on opposite sides of the round table, neither speaking. 2 minutes later, An irritated Aberforth slammed 2 glasses of fire whiskey in front of them. Atticus and Cacus raised their glasses to each other and took a sip. Ah! Cacus sighed contentedly, savoring the spicy, rich flavor as it warmed his throat. Listening to the rain outside, his expression and voice carried a hint of melancholy. What terrible weather! Atticus put away his smile and looked at Cacus calmly. Who says it's not? In fact, I've been waiting for you to find me, Mr. Blaine, Cacus said. It's been a few months, ever since the end of the second Triwizard tournament and the announcement of you-know-who's return at Hogwarts. I knew you would come to see me. Oh, why? Atticus asked, intrigued. I have worked closely with you, Mr. Blaine, Cacus replied, taking a deep breath. I know your style. Dumbledore is focused solely on you-know-who and the Ministry of Magic, but you're different. You see things Dumbledore cannot. I know that once you decide to fight you-know-who, you won't allow anyone to exploit the situation. Atticus smiled, lowering his head to take another sip of his drink. The Foley family suffered greatly during the First Wizarding War. Hector Foley made a grave mistake in his dealings with Grindelwald, leading to the family's influence in the Ministry of Magic being purged. To compensate, you sent the family's elite members into the war against Grindelwald. After the war, the Foley family nearly vanished from the wizarding world. Yes, my charming ancestor always had a unique vision in tense situations, Cacus replied with a bitter smile. So, Mr. Blaine, is it time for the Foley family to choose sides and stand for something? It's not the Foley family that I value, Cacus. Excuse me, the power the Foley family has accumulated over the past half-century is insignificant in my eyes, the Ministry of Magic's or Voldemort's. What I value is you, Cacus. You are worth more than the Foley family. Oh, thank you, Mr. Blaine, Cacus responded, though he didn't seem particularly pleased by the compliment. Instead, he said gloomily, I would have preferred to stay in my proper place all these years, avoiding danger. If that's your style, Cacus, Atticus laughed, then you wouldn't have chosen this path. End of this chapter. Chapter 1002, Preparation. Aberforth was idly wiping a glass behind the bar, seemingly bored, but Atticus Blaine knew he was eavesdropping on their conversation. Aberforth would undoubtedly relay everything he heard to Albus Dumbledore. This was precisely why Atticus chose the Hog's Head Inn for this meeting. Some matters were too delicate to discuss face-to-face, as they could lead to intense conflict. So, you met with me today to determine which side the Foley family will support, Mr. Blaine? Cacus asked, appearing mentally prepared. He took a deep breath and exhaled heavily. I told you, Cacus, I don't care about the Foley family, Atticus replied, shaking his head. How is the underground world faring now? This was an anticipated question, and Cacus was not surprised. It's more prosperous than before, Cacus explained. Recently, many foreigners have entered the country. They're not the most reputable individuals. They thrive in dirty, dark environments, stealing and robbing homes, then selling the stolen goods in the underground market. Conflicts have increased because these newcomers generally don't follow the rules. Atticus nodded slightly, contemplating for a moment. If war breaks out, what do you think these people will do? This question was also expected, and Cacus had clearly pondered it long ago. You know, Mr. Blaine, the wizards entrenched in the underground world come from diverse backgrounds, Cacus said calmly. A significant number are old-school wizards who believe in keeping magic secret. They're even more traditional than the ancient wizard families. To them, whether it's you, Dumbledore, or the Dark Lord, you're all heretics. They hope we destroy each other in the war and then establish a new order. The rest are a mix of newly arrived dark wizards and those who've long roamed the dark side of this country, having received their magical education at Hogwarts. Some of them do believe in you-know-who's pure-blood supremacy and wizard supremacy, but most, if I may be frank, are just opportunists. They won't oppose you or Dumbledore, nor will they resist the Dark Lord. If you lose power, they'll seize the opportunity. Atticus regarded Cacus with appreciation. It was indeed a waste for a wizard with such clarity of thought to spend his days in the underground world. Atticus nodded, maintaining his calm demeanor. These individuals are undoubtedly significant destabilizing factors, Cacus. In your opinion, how should we restrain them? Caucus had anticipated Atticus Blaine's concerns and had certainly devised a countermeasure. Speaking as if he were taking an exam, Caucus said in a solemn tone, "We need to adopt different strategies to deal with them, Mr. Blaine. I don't think it's necessary to focus too much on those who are fence-sitters and merely want to exploit the situation, as long as you, Dumbledore, and the Ministry of Magic remain strong." Caucus's eyes burned with intensity. As long as the forces opposing the Dark Lord do not lose their power, they won't have the courage to kill or burn. At most, they'll resort to robbery. However, deterring them is essential. If the wizarding world enters a state of open warfare, I suggest the Ministry of Magic pass strict legislation to impose severe penalties, even the death penalty, on those who disrupt social order. Crash! The noise from the bar drew the attention of Atticus and Caucus. Aberforth had accidentally crushed the glass he was wiping, shards piercing his hand, causing blood to trickle down. Noticing the gazes of Atticus and Caucus, Aberforth shouted angrily, "Oh, did I interrupt your discussion on how to handle things? To conquer the world?" Atticus Blaine asked gently, "Oh no, Aberforth. I just want to know if you need any help." Aberforth felt a chill as he met Atticus's deep purple eyes, which reminded him of a villain. "No need, Atticus," Aberforth snapped, pulling out a shard of glass and immediately wincing in pain. He noticed the girl in the portrait above the mantelpiece watching him timidly, and his expression softened. "Oh, it's okay, Ariana. It's just a minor injury. I can handle it," he reassured her. With that, Aberforth hurried into the back room of the bar to find some medicine. Atticus turned his attention to the young girl in the portrait. She was shy, and when she noticed his gaze, she quickly turned and hid behind a bush in the painting. Her eyes, strikingly similar to Albus Dumbledore's, peeked out from the tangled branches, watching Atticus with a mix of curiosity and caution. A flicker of pity crossed Atticus's face before he looked away. "Go on, Caucus," Atticus prompted. As one of the most informed individuals in the wizarding world, Caucus was privy to some of the Dumbledore family's secrets. However, given the sensitive nature of the topic, he was cautious about what he revealed. He, too, felt sympathy for the little girl in the portrait and took a moment to gather his thoughts. "We were just discussing that," Caucus began, taking a deep breath. "Honestly, it's not difficult to identify those who align with you-know-who's radical views. They might have already been recruited. These individuals are always loudly discussing their plans in the underground world, trying to rally more to their cause. They're the Death Eaters in the making." Under Atticus's watchful gaze, Caucus's expression turned grim. "Once the war breaks out, they'll undoubtedly join the Dark Lord's ranks. I believe we should gather information on these individuals and ensure those who are truly unforgivable are removed from this world. With enough gold, there will always be someone willing to take on this task." "I can't help but applaud your insight, Caucus," Atticus chuckled. "Indeed, gold often shines brighter than ideals. With the right price, there will be no shortage of takers for such a commission." "I must caution you, Mr. Blaine," Caucus said warily. "That will require a significant amount of gold." "That won't be an issue, Caucus," Atticus replied warmly. "There are more people who support justice than you might think. Human life is always more valuable than gold, and I'm willing to use gold to prevent casualties. Now, what are your thoughts on those secret witches?" For the first time, Caucus hesitated. He leaned back in his chair, sighing with a touch of melancholy. The underground world thrives because of those secret witches. The first to gather there were drawn by the Black Stone Tower, Merlin's elusive treasure. To be honest, Mr. Blaine, they are formidable and independent. Who knows what role they'll play in a war? They might simply watch from the sidelines, or they could exploit the chaos to perform dark magic they wouldn't normally dare. Such ancient, malevolent, and unchecked magic often has dire consequences. It would be better if they joined the war directly and kept their distance from us. If they refuse. "You're mistaken, Caucus," Atticus interjected, toying with the glass in his hand, his eyes thoughtful. "Their reluctance isn't due to arrogance, it's because we've overlooked their needs. Our neglect has fueled their pride. We can bring them to our side, but we'll need a mediator whom both they and we trust to bridge the gap." "You mean me?" Caucus asked, stunned, as he looked at Atticus, who was smiling knowingly at him. "But what can I do?" End of this chapter. Chapter 1003, Preparation. 3. But what can I do? Cacus asked, bewildered, as he gazed into the enigmatic eyes across the table. Atticus Blaine, seated opposite him, calmly traced the rim of his wineglass with his fingertips. I mentioned earlier that secret witches have always been reluctant to integrate into the modern magic system. This reluctance stems from both their reasons and ours. When the modern magic system was first established, the wizards who built it did not create a space for the entire group of secret witches. Cacus frowned slightly, struggling to grasp the full meaning of Atticus's words. Noticing his confusion, Atticus smiled and posed a question. If a wizard of secret origin wanted to join the Ministry of Magic, what avenues do you think they could pursue, Cacus? The idea of entering the Ministry of Magic made Cacus narrow his eyes, as if a realization was dawning on him. It was undoubtedly a challenging endeavor, even for wizards who had graduated from Hogwarts with a formal modern magic education. Only the most exceptional young wizards, those who had earned multiple Newt certificates, could hope to catch the Ministry's attention. Suddenly, Cacus's eyes widened in surprise and suspicion as he looked at Atticus. "It seems you understand," Atticus said with a knowing smile. "The Ministry of Magic does not accept secret wizards because they lack a way to assess their abilities. Unlike young wizards who graduate from Hogwarts and take the Newt's exam, the Ministry and various workshops and companies can evaluate young wizards based on their owls or Newt scores. Therefore, if we want secret witches to integrate into our system, we must demonstrate our sincerity. We should encourage the Wizarding Examinations Authority to establish a new assessment mechanism to evaluate their magical abilities, aligning it with the owls and Newt's exams. The Ministry of Magic would then recognize these test results." As Cacus pondered this, Atticus continued, "During the initial years of implementing this new assessment system, the Ministry of Magic should allocate a fixed recruitment quota for secret witches. The Ministry serves as the guiding force in the wizarding world. Once it approves, workshops and companies will soon follow suit. This way, secret witches will have legitimate means of livelihood, rather than lurking in the underground world, causing disturbances." Undoubtedly, this was a brilliant idea. However, as someone who frequently interacted with secret witches, Cacus remained cautious. "I don't deny that it's a promising idea to extend goodwill to those resistant individuals," Cacus said carefully. "But you know, the issues run deeper than that. The magic practiced by secret witches, along with their ancient spellcasting methods, often involves cruelty that our laws cannot tolerate, and that's just the surface of the differences between us." "I am fully aware of the challenges, Cacus," Atticus replied. "I am not naive enough to believe that all secret wizards will immediately embrace this initiative. It is a long process, but at least it will show them our sincerity and help us garner more support, preventing them from siding with our adversaries." Cacus nodded thoughtfully. "This isn't something that can be achieved overnight. The Ministry of Magic should establish a dedicated department for this purpose. To draw a parallel, it would be similar to the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures, aimed at bridging the gap between the two sides. Wizards among them who wish to integrate into modern magical society will also need to make sacrifices and abandon some outdated traditions. When you become the head of this department, Cacus, you'll need to devise policies that facilitate their swift integration into our community." Atticus's words hung in the air, leaving Cacus deep in contemplation. "There are indeed some secret wizards who are forced to stay there. I know them. I plan to—" "Oh, wait!" Cacus suddenly snapped back to reality, staring at Atticus Blaine in surprise. "Did you just say you wanted me to be?" "Oh, I heard you right, but I'm just a... Haha. Do you really plan to stay in that dirty, smelly underground for the rest of your life, Cacus?" "It's a complete waste of your talent," Atticus replied with a calm smile. "I believe the time is right for the Foley family to return to the Ministry of Magic and the public eye." Cacus's lips parted slightly as he stared blankly at Atticus Blaine. Inside his stiff body, his heart began to warm with excitement. Could the Foley family truly be restored to glory? For half a century, countless family members had tried to secure a place in the Ministry of Magic, but all their efforts had failed, and now this dream seemed within reach, unnoticed by anyone else. Kakus wanted to speak, but his voice was hoarse, as if he hadn't had a drink in days. Me, he croaked. Could he really leave the underground world and the den of thieves that kept him on edge every day? He blinked, looking around the dim bar, unsure if he was dreaming. Aberforth, who had just treated his injuries and emerged from the inner hall, startled Kakus. He asked subconsciously, "But Dumbledore?" "Oh, I'm sure Headmaster Dumbledore won't oppose it. That's a good thing, isn't it?" Atticus ignored Aberforth's direct gaze. "Over the years you've built some connections. These connections can ensure that when I propose this idea to the Ministry of Magic again, those who object will be silenced." The mention of the Ministry of Magic made Kakus shudder, and his expression darkened. "But the Ministry of Magic. If it were before, I wouldn't doubt your ability to push this forward, but now Cornelius Fudge seems to be." Kakus hesitated. "It won't last much longer," Atticus said, looking out the window at the heavy rain. The occasional flashes of lightning made his face appear resolute and majestic. "Don't worry about that. I'll make it happen. By the way, Kakus, there's one more thing." He turned to Kakus, whose face was slightly confused. "Your wife and daughter must consider the dangers they may face in the war. Tell them to be prepared. I have a place that should ensure their safety and be ready for evacuation at any time." After Kakus left, only Aberforth and Atticus remained in the dimly lit hall of the Hogshead. "Please give me another drink, Aberforth," Atticus said, approaching the bar with an empty cup in hand. He smiled and handed it to Aberforth, who was silently wiping a glass. "What are you still doing here, Blaine?" Aberforth didn't take the cup, but glanced at Atticus with an unhappy look. "The broker who made the dirty deal with you has gone away, right? Don't you have anything to do at Hogwarts?" "Oh, don't be so harsh, Aberforth," Atticus replied, still smiling, showing no sign of anger. "I'm just a visitor. I come here to enjoy a few glasses of wine and relieve the stress of work in my free time." "Humph," Aberforth scoffed coldly, turning sideways to look at Atticus. "I almost doubt whether you're Albus's son. The way you lie without blinking is exactly like him." "Oh, you're totally humiliating me, Aberforth," Atticus frowned, sounding displeased. "I know what you're planning." Aberforth's words were sharp. "You're plotting these schemes against me just to get me to pass on the message to Albus. You know my saintly brother won't tell him your plans directly." The sound of the copper bell at the door drew the attention of both men inside the bar. "Ah, Atticus, you're here already. Oh, sorry, am I late?" The visitor waved his arms excitedly, shaking off the raindrops from his hair as he skipped toward the bar. "Please, Aberforth, give me a whiskey too, oh." "It's a dreadful day, isn't it?" Aberforth muttered, hunching his shoulders as he glared at Atticus Blaine with a fiery intensity. "For heaven's sake, how many people did you send my way?" End of this chapter. Chapter 1004, Preparation 4. "Oh, don't be so reserved, Aberforth," Atticus Blaine said with a smile. "I sent someone to your place. Doesn't that prove my trust in you?" "We're not that familiar, Blaine," Aberforth roared angrily. Despite his outburst, he knew he had no way to contend with Atticus, so he begrudgingly tossed the rag onto the bar and turned to prepare whiskey for Ludo Bagman. When Atticus's gaze landed on Ludo, a flicker of unease crossed Ludo's usually cheerful face. The last time they had met was on the outskirts of Attenborough, where Atticus had inquired about the goblin's predictions regarding Hermione Granger's chances in the game. During that encounter, Atticus had also discovered Ludo's involvement in commentating on a club-level Quidditch match and accepting bribes. The memory of that scene flashed through Ludo's mind, and he inwardly lamented his misfortune. It seemed Atticus Blaine always managed to catch him in compromising situations. "Oh, sorry. Am I late, Atticus?" Ludo asked with a smile as he sat down. "But it's not my fault, Atticus. The rain was so heavy that a flash flood flooded the railway, forcing the Hogwarts Express to stop for a while to avoid being swept away. So, I'm the one who should apologize, Ludo," Atticus replied with a smile. "I shouldn't have asked you to come to Hogsmeade in such dreadful weather. I hope I didn't cause you any extra trouble." "Oh, no, thank you, Aberforth," Ludo said, accepting the wine glass from the sullen Aberforth and taking a sip. "So, we're here to discuss the third match of the Triwizard Tournament, right, Atticus? To be honest, it's become quite a burden at the Ministry these days. You know why. There was a big mess in the second match, and no one talks about it anymore. Ludo took another drink, his expression melancholy. If it weren't for you, this would have been a complete disaster. I want to thank you, Atticus. Without you, what would I have done with all the money I invested? As Atticus observed Ludo, who seemed relieved that the third match could proceed smoothly, he couldn't help but feel a twinge of respect. While most wizards in the magical world were hoping for a stroke of luck regarding the mysterious man's rumored resurrection, Ludo remained blissfully unconcerned about the potential war, focusing instead on his gambling and gold. With a rustle, Atticus produced a piece of parchment from his pocket and gently placed it on the table. Let's save the gratitude for later, Ludo. First, take a look at this. Oh, Ludo said, reaching for the parchment with interest. What is this, Atticus? I suppose it's the project plan design for the third game, eh? Ludo, intrigued, picked up the parchment and immediately appeared as if he had stumbled upon something extraordinary. He sat up straight, squinting at the words in the candlelight, occasionally glancing at Atticus with a mix of suspicion and curiosity. Hey, how about it, Ludo? Do you like this surprise? Atticus chuckled softly. This is. Ludo rubbed his eyes, nearly pressing his face against the parchment as he scrutinized the signature at the bottom, trying to determine if it was a forgery by Atticus. If you don't believe me, Ludo, you can verify it with the goblins, Atticus suggested. Atticus Blaine restrained his smile and said calmly, In short, you've settled your account with the goblins. They will never threaten you with this again. The trembling of Ludo's hand as he held the parchment was enough to show how excited he was at that moment. Was it you, Atticus? Ludo asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. He knew well that there was no such thing as a free lunch in the world. Having spent many years in the wizarding world and holding a high position, Ludo understood this truth all too well. He stared at the composed Atticus with a mix of doubt and astonishment. The money he had borrowed from the goblins over the years was not just a mere 1,000 or 2,000 galleons. You must be wondering if there's a catch, Atticus continued, noticing Ludo's heavy breathing and the water slowly dripping from his hair, unclear whether it was rain or sweat. An inexplicable feeling of fear crept into Ludo's heart. I was planning to persuade the minister not to let that dreadful woman Umbridge come to Hogwarts and cause trouble. Atticus, perhaps you've bet on the wrong horse, Ludo said anxiously. Do you know anything about the lottery, Ludo? Atticus asked, surprising Ludo by not mentioning anything about interfering with the Minister of Magic's decisions. Instead, he posed an unexpected question. Lottery? Ludo blinked in confusion. What is that? A kind of book? Atticus explained in a casual, almost scientific manner. It's normal that you don't understand, Ludo. It's a muggle thing. Much like the gambling contracts you signed with the goblins, lotteries are usually issued by muggle organizations with official backing. They predict the course of a game and its outcome in advance. It's completely legal and compliant. Atticus shrugged, as if the topic had just occurred to him. I was reminded of the serious incident during the second game of the Triwizard tournament. You, not just you, but perhaps many others, are hoping the tournament goes smoothly, given the gold you've bet on various odds. As Ludo's eyes brightened, Atticus continued softly. Gambling is indeed a pleasure in life for many wizards, but currently, the Ministry of Magic in each country seems to lack effective control over this area, allowing it to run wild. All the benefits are seized by goblins and some unspeakable forces. Shaking his head regretfully, Atticus looked at Ludo with a hint of anticipation. If the Ministry of Magic could reach a consensus with the Quidditch League and introduce the Muggle Lottery, it would bring good profits to both the Ministry and the League. It would also provide a safe and reliable gaming platform for those who love the thrill of gambling. What do you think, Ludo? Ludo opened his mouth, but before he could speak, Atticus smiled and smacked his lips. Sk. If a sports lottery could be established, it should fall under the Department of Magical Games and Sports. I think a new department should be set up to manage this matter. A department specializing in gambling, above board and risk-free, belonging to the Department of Magical Games and Sports. Ludo stared at Atticus in a daze, his lips moving, wanting to say something but unable to. You know, Atticus, I've never had any ambitions. Oh, all right, I promise you. I'll go talk to the minister. It's truly a mess bringing Umbridge into Hogwarts. Ludo panted, glancing again at the parchment he held tightly in his hand. It was the certificate of his freedom. Yes, you've convinced me, Atticus. You're such a devil. You know I never want to get involved in these troubles. So, how do you plan to implement your proposal? In my opinion, it's a good idea, but under the current circumstances, the minister is unlikely to agree with your suggestion. Moreover, if you want to promote this matter, you must obtain the consent of the Quidditch World Alliance, Atticus Blaine stated confidently. Don't worry, Ludo. This will definitely happen in the second half of this year. The Minister of Magic won't be an obstacle. As for the Quidditch World Alliance, they will undoubtedly push hard for more profits. There will be many challenging negotiations. So, Atticus smiled. As a representative, I will advocate for a share of the Quidditch lottery profits for Hogwarts. In exchange for my participation, I can authorize the World Cup League to use my surveillance cameras to broadcast the games worldwide. This will generate substantial income. For this reason, I believe they will make some concessions. Additionally, Atticus stood up, indicating that this somewhat hurried conversation was drawing to a close. I also want to correct a misunderstanding, Ludo. I don't intend to ask you to coordinate Fudge's plan to appoint Umbridge to Hogwarts. It's impossible for Umbridge to enter Hogwarts. If she wants to go to Azkaban, I can assist. With that, I wanted to meet with you today simply to... Atticus looked down at Ludo, the sharp glint in his purple eyes causing Ludo to shiver involuntarily. Ludo asked hesitantly, "For what?" "Just to gain your support, Ludo." End of this chapter. Chapter 5, Preparation 5. The rain, relentless and unyielding, continued to pour down as midsummer approached, showing no signs of letting up. The streets of Hogsmeade were submerged, and rainwater had seeped into the homes of many villagers. Clad in raincoats, the villagers hurried through the downpour, working tirelessly to unclog the village's sewers. Even Aberforth had to rush out with his wand, taking urgent measures to prevent his old brand from collapsing under the weight of the storm. Atticus Blaine watched as Ludo departed, disappearing into the heavy rain after only a few steps. Atticus hadn't disclosed the reason he needed Ludo's support, but Ludo's confused and uneasy expression suggested he had an inkling of Atticus's intentions. The sky was dark, as if night had descended prematurely. The Black Lake's waves crashed against the cliffs, their roar drowning out the thunder. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the storm, becoming clear in Atticus's view. The visitor wore a rainproof cloak, and his high-top black leather shoes splashed through the puddles. His dark yellow eyes, sharp as a hunting lion's, pierced through the rain and met Atticus's smiling face. "I'm here, Blaine." "Ah, thanks for coming. Was your journey smooth, Rufus?" Atticus inquired. Rufus Scrimgeour, head of the Auror Office, the largest armed department under the Department of Magical Law Enforcement at the Ministry of Magic, glanced up at the blood-stained pig's head on the bar sign, which even the heavy rain couldn't cleanse. His disdain for the place was evident. "Why here instead of Hogwarts? Are you trying to keep Dumbledore in the dark about our meeting?" Rufus's sharp gaze and fierce demeanor bore down on Atticus, but Atticus's warm smile remained unshaken. "I suppose you didn't inform the Ministry about your little excursion, did you, Rufus?" Atticus replied, gesturing for Rufus to come inside. "Come on, Rufus. It's pouring out here. It's foolish for us to stand at the door and talk. The bar owner is out. Let's have a drink to ease our fatigue. What would you like?" Rufus hesitated, his eyes scanning every corner of the dimly lit Hogshead Tavern before settling back on Atticus Blaine's face. Atticus's slightly smiling eyes seemed to see through Rufus's concerns, silently assuring him that if he intended any harm, there would be no need for an ambush. This was the infuriating aspect of dealing with powerful wizards. They operated by their own moral compass, unbound by conventional rules. "Casual," Rufus finally replied, stepping into the bar with a calm voice. "Oh, those with fiery tempers shouldn't indulge in fiery drinks. Let's have a cup, then." Atticus mused aloud, his eyes scanning Aberforth's wine rack. Musk sherry? Looks promising." He tapped the bar counter with his fingers, and a dusty bottle of brown sherry floated silently from the wine rack. The cork vanished in a wisp of green smoke, and the wine poured with a sound as pleasant as a clear spring running through a stream. The floor, covered with centuries of oil and dust, bore damp new footprints. One set belonged to Atticus Blaine, pacing beside the bar, while the other two led to a small round table with a few empty wine glasses. In the dimly lit back of the bar, Rufus broke the silence. "It seems I'm not your first guest today. Am I, Blaine?" His voice carried a hint of sarcasm as he turned to face the gray-haired young man seated at the bar. Atticus Blaine responded with a light-hearted tone. "Ah, indeed. I don't have classes today, and with nowhere particularly interesting to spend my time, I decided to meet a few friends for drinks here." Rufus, with a cold edge to his voice, muttered to himself, "Oh, I'm not your friend, Blaine." Atticus, unfazed, picked up a wineglass and handed it to Rufus as he made his way to the round table. "Perhaps not before," he said, "but maybe you'll have a chance to be one later. Come on, Rufus, don't just stand there. Sit down. You've had a long journey." Rufus's nose twitched as he silently moved to the sight side of Atticus and took a seat. He eyed the glass of sherry that Atticus had offered him with suspicion, placing it gently on the table without taking a sip. His gaze remained stern as he looked at Atticus. "Ah, Aurora habits," Atticus remarked, amused by Rufus's caution. He chuckled softly. "But surely you don't think I'd poison you?" "I'd rather be cautious," Rufus replied calmly, not revealing that he had left a will in his office before coming here. If anything unfortunate were to happen, the will would reveal who was responsible for his demise. "Time is precious for both of us, Blaine. Let's skip the meaningless probing and get straight to the point. Why did you ask me to come here?" Rufus's sharp yellow eyes, partially obscured by a strand of wet gray hair, remained fixed on Atticus as if he were interrogating a suspect. While many might be intimidated by Rufus Scrimgeour's reputation as the head of the Auror office, Atticus remained unperturbed. He leisurely sipped his dry sherry, his expression gentle and tolerant. "Ah, straight to the point. I appreciate that," Atticus said. "You want to know why I asked you here, Rufus? It depends on a premise, or rather, the answer to a question." Rufus frowned slightly but remained silent, waiting for Atticus to continue. "Dumbledore claims that Voldemort has returned," Atticus stated, causing Rufus to tense. "I say the same, but the Minister of Magic disagrees. As the head of the Auror office, the backbone of the fight against evil in the wizarding world, what do you think?" Rufus's gaze never wavered, his eyes sharper than ever. "Is this the premise for our formal conversation?" "Exactly," Atticus nodded, smiling. "You need to provide evidence, otherwise—" "If that's the way it is," Rufus began, but Atticus raised a hand to interrupt him. He looked calmly at Rufus, the most esteemed Auror in the Ministry of Magic after Moody. Many wizards who operated in the gray areas feared this renowned Auror. Rufus had once led a team to corner the Golden Viper and the bounty wizard accompanying him, only to be thwarted by a spell from the Golden Viper. Atticus's tone was calm, devoid of a smile, yet filled with determination and a hint of cruelty. "I'm sorry, but then we have nothing to discuss." A surge of humiliated anger flared within Rufus. He wanted to leap up and berate Atticus for his arrogance and rudeness, but when he met Atticus's piercing gaze, his face turned pale, and the air around him seemed to thicken, suffocating him. To declare whether the Dark Lord had truly returned was no simple matter. Rufus knew the answer Atticus sought, but if he provided it and it reached Cornelius Fudge's ears, he might find himself in a predicament akin to that of Sirius Black. The situation was becoming increasingly difficult. Fudge was aware that Sirius was a direct descendant of Atticus Blaine, and he wanted to expel him from the Ministry of Magic. However, he hesitated, fearing that such an action would provoke Atticus. Additionally, Bones, who supported Atticus, was actively working to protect Sirius. Bones understood that reinstating Sirius would completely infuriate Fudge's faction. As a result, both sides remained cautious, leaving Sirius in a state of limbo. But was the mysterious man truly resurrected? This question stirred Rufus's heart, causing his breath to become uneven. It was a question that required little contemplation, wasn't it? End of this chapter. Chapter 1006, Preparation 6. Has the mysterious man been resurrected and is now lurking among the people, carrying out his activities? This question doesn't require much contemplation. Simply open your eyes and observe. The wizards sneaking across the border, the deteriorating security in the British wizarding world, and the wizarding families poised to act. Even the most naive wizard should be able to make an accurate judgment. Yet, Rufus remained silent. The real challenge in answering this question lay elsewhere. His hands, hidden beneath his cloak, clenched unconsciously as Rufus stared intently at the young face across the round table. The young man's complexion appeared slightly pale. If Atticus Blaine had somehow recorded their conversation and presented it to the Minister of Magic, Rufus's career would be over, much like the young man who had been expelled from the Weasley family. But even now, his situation was precarious. Technically, Rufus had always supported the Minister of Magic's faction within the Ministry. Given the recent tensions in the wizarding world, the minister should have sought his support. Strangely, however, the highest decision-making levels in the Ministry were gradually stripping him of his power. Ms. Bones initiated this process, bypassing him to communicate directly with the Aurors under his command. Although she acted discreetly, her actions did not escape the notice of the head of the Auror office. It wasn't surprising that Ms. Bones acted this way, as Atticus Blaine had publicly supported her within the Ministry, and she was perceived as part of the minister's faction. What puzzled Rufus was that Ms. Umbridge was also secretly backing his subordinate, Dawlish, to compete with him for power. Umbridge was a staunch member of the ministerial faction, just like Rufus. Why would she undermine him? Moreover, when Rufus expressed his dissatisfaction almost directly to the Minister of Magic, the minister did not defend him. Instead, he turned a blind eye to Umbridge's actions. Clearly, Rufus had lost the trust of both the minister and Deputy Minister Umbridge. Perhaps Dawlish had done something to earn greater trust from the top management, leaving Rufus sidelined. As Rufus scrutinized Atticus Blaine's face, which seemed confident that Rufus would provide the desired answer, his dark yellow eyes flickered with a faint light. "You know why," Rufus began, but stopped when he saw Blaine's slightly raised eyebrows. He hadn't yet addressed Blaine's question, and he doubted Blaine would kindly clarify his confusion. At some point, Aberforth had dealt with the flood and quietly returned to the bar. He noticed the bottle of aged sherry that Atticus had privately opened, but did not lose his temper. Instead, he fixed his gaze on Rufus Scrimgeour, his blue eyes filled with solemnity and astonishment. Of all the people Blaine had encountered in his bar today, Rufus's presence was the most surprising to Aberforth. With Albus Dumbledore's support and running a bar like this, Aberforth was far from an ordinary, uninformed villager. He was one of the most well-informed individuals in the wizarding world, which made Rufus's appearance all the more shocking. Rufus Scrimgeour had always been a pillar of the Minister for Magic's faction, hadn't he? Why would he meet with Blaine in private? The implications were truly chilling. A strange, heart-pounding, blood-pumping atmosphere filled the damp, cold, dim bar, as if a significant meeting to determine the future was taking place. As Aberforth watched Blaine, who sat at the round table, clearly dominating the negotiations, he moved his lips, but Atticus Blaine noticed his lips were dry, as if they had been scorched by the sun. He gently poured the remaining wine from the bottle that Brian had secretly opened into his glass. As the cool wine touched his lips, Aberforth was reminded of his last conversation with Albus. It was early last month when Atticus left Hogwarts and traveled to New York with a wolf cub. During this time, the Ministry of Magic, led by Fudge, launched an unexpected attack on Albus. They revoked many of his titles, including Chief Wizard of the Wizengamot, and cancelled numerous interviews and academic invitations. Aberforth could see a hint of helplessness in the brow of his otherwise omnipotent brother. "The Ministry seems to think you're easier to deal with, don't they?" Aberforth remarked sarcastically one late night, standing behind the bar and watching Albus sip whiskey under a flickering oil lamp. "Oh." Albus, lost in thought, snapped back to reality. He looked at his brother, his clear eyes showing no anger, only a touch of relief and emotion. "If you mean the Ministry's decision to target me rather than Atticus, Aberforth," Albus smiled, "I must admit, despite my strained relationship with the Ministry, their decision was wise. It's rare for Connolly not to make the usual mistake of provoking Atticus. It's unusual to hear you curse," Aberforth noted calmly, a stark contrast to his usual blunt demeanor. "Heh," Albus chuckled, unfazed. People see me as a law-abiding, moral person. You know I'm probably not, Aberforth, but these labels, like permanent sticking charms, do restrict me. Atticus, on the other hand, is much freer. He took a sip of the scarlet wine, watching the sediment swirl in the glass. I've always been wary of Atticus, wary of when the violence hidden in his character might overpower his kindness, causing more harm to the wizarding world than Voldemort ever did. But I must admit, his brutality grants him more freedom to act. Yes, Connolly doesn't dare provoke him, and sometimes I envy that. That's right. A sudden voice pulled Aberforth from his memories. He blinked and realized it was the head of the Auror office speaking. The overwhelming pressure finally forced Rufus Scrimgeour to concede. Rufus's face was pale, his voice hollow. I think it's an irrefutable truth that he's back. The suffocating atmosphere in the bar dissipated instantly. Good judgment, Rufus. Atticus finally smiled, looking at Rufus with admiration. Now, the second question. In the dim light, Atticus's eyes glowed faintly, like two deadly whirlpools drawing Rufus's soul. What would you do, Rufus, if Voldemort had returned to the wizarding world? I can. Under Atticus Blaine's gaze, Rufus struggled to find his words. He breathed deeply, sweat beading on his forehead. Resist. We must fight to the end. We have no other choice, right? Atticus's cheerful laughter echoed in the dim room. We are comrades then, Rufus. The essence of their conversation was captured in those two questions. With Rufus's genuine response, further discussion was unnecessary. Everything was understood. What would happen if the answer I gave today wasn't what you wanted, Atticus? Rufus asked, turning back with a slightly flushed face as he prepared to leave. Nothing will happen, Atticus assured him. The heavy rain had stopped, and a hazy evening light filled the room, appeared in the sky. As Rufus's dark yellow eyes regained their sharpness, Atticus Blaine smiled and reiterated, I'm not the Dark Lord, am I? End of this chapter. Chapter 1007, A Sigh. Rufus Scrimgeour donned his cloak and strode away, quickly vanishing into the flooded alley. Atticus Blaine watched Rufus's retreating figure until he disappeared onto the road, then finally turned his gaze away. Scrimgeour had been convinced by him. Unlike Cacus and Ludo, Atticus hadn't made any promises. He understood that if he tried to barter power for promises, someone like Rufus would simply walk away. Atticus had the audacity to meet with Rufus and ultimately persuade him because they shared a fundamental common goal. Of course, this was a transaction, and the fulfillment of rights was essential. Turning his head, Atticus noticed Aberforth behind the bar, staring at him intently. Atticus smiled. I'm sorry to trouble you, Aberforth, but you don't seem to have much business, do you? A little trouble? Aberforth seemed on the verge of a sneer, but couldn't quite manage it. The twitching corners of his mouth and his puffed chest revealed his anger. You were plotting to overthrow the Ministry of Magic in my bar, and you call that a minor inconvenience? His low tone escalated into a roar. If you want to spend the rest of your life with those dark creatures in Azkaban, I can't stop you, Blaine, but I'm telling you, I won't be dragged into it. I'm going to write to the Ministry and expose you now. Overthrow the Ministry? Atticus chuckled. Oh, what a terrible misunderstanding, Aberforth. When did I ever say I wanted to overthrow the Ministry of Magic? I merely wish to correct some of the fatal errors the Ministry is currently making. Don't try to fool me with political rhetoric, Blaine, Aberforth shouted fiercely. I don't want to end up in Azkaban just before I'm about to go into the grave. I'm going to report you, Blaine. Yes, I'm going to do it. After putting on his coat and waving his wand to clean the table, Atticus laughed. Then please, Aberforth, but I'm afraid I don't have time to argue with you. I have other meetings today. Well, goodbye. Atticus waved to the portrait on the mantelpiece, where a girl watched him with timid, curious eyes, and quickly left the Hog's Head bar. The sound of the doorbell closing echoed in the dim, grimy bar, mingling with Aberforth's heavy breathing. His azure eyes glared at the tightly closed door. Suddenly, his expression brightened. He rushed to the door and opened it, only to find the path outside empty, which reignited his anger. Damn it, Blaine, you haven't paid yet. Atticus did not return to Hogwarts through the secret passage via Honeydukes, nor did he enter the school grounds through the main gate. Instead, he climbed over the high slope where the Shrieking Shack stood, entered the deep, forbidden forest from the undulating wilderness and reached the forest's edge in the form of a shadow. He had forgotten about the venue, flooded by the lake, and the young wizards who were preparing for morning exercises but were blocked in the hallway by the flood. Once again, Atticus praised his own cunning. A heavy rain had transformed the forbidden forest into a vast ocean. In the dark woods, there were no sounds of insects or birds, only the constant gurgling of water. At first glance, the water in the forest was deep enough for boats to sail, with only a few tree stumps, tangled branches, and moss-covered rocks protruding from the surface. After determining his direction, Atticus once again became a shadow and swiftly glided across the water. 10 minutes later, he appeared at the door of the centaur's dwelling. The rain had just ceased, leaving the sky's light dimmer than the bright summer days. Torches flickered, casting a warm glow over the dark expanse of the forbidden forest. The centaurs, who had inhabited this forest long before Hogwarts was even a thought, were unfazed by the recent downpour. Their camp was strategically positioned on high ground, a testament to their resilience and wisdom. As Atticus Blaine approached the wooden fort, he noticed several bodies hanging from tall poles near the entrance. The corpses, though fresh, are a grim reminder of the forest's dangers. Atticus raised an eyebrow and asked, "Did these people recently intrude into the woods?" The centaur elder, Horn, who had been waiting at the entrance, flicked his silver mane and dug a shallow pit in the wet earth with his front hooves. Unlike Firenze and Ronan, who stood behind him holding torches with visible anger, Horn's voice carried a note of sorrow. "They are not British," he replied. With his hands clasped behind his back, Atticus walked over to the swaying bodies, scrutinizing their faces. Finding no one familiar, he shook his head in disappointment but soon managed to smile. "You know, Horn, if Hogwarts falls, more foreigners will find their way here." Firenze and Ronan exchanged uneasy glances, their eyes darting to the elder's back. "I'm sorry, Mr. Blaine," Horn said, lowering his head. His voice was weary. "The centaurs will not defy the will of the heavens. The planets have revealed what is to come. It is destined, and we will not interfere in the wizard's war." Atticus chuckled softly. "Do you really think this is a wizard's war?" he asked, gesturing to the bodies. Firenze seemed eager to speak, but Ronan's gaze held him back. Horn avoided Atticus's eyes, remaining silent. Sensing the elder's reluctance, Atticus did not press further. "Let's go," he said quietly. The sound of hooves splashing through puddles echoed in the forest's darkness as Atticus floated beside Horn, moving slowly forward. Were they aware of the visit? Atticus's voice, rich with varied tones, pierced the oppressive silence of the forest. "I received your notice, but I haven't had time to negotiate with them yet," Horn replied. Atticus nodded thoughtfully. "How much do they know about Vicia Cleona's fate?" he inquired in a hushed tone. "They are unaware that Miss Cleona has been imprisoned in the wizard prison," Horn admitted, stumbling slightly in a shallow puddle. Firenze and Ronan quickly moved to assist him. After regaining his footing, Horn continued. "When Miss Cleona sent the sect members into the secret realm, she warned them against maintaining contact with the outside world, lest they face multiple dangers. Before her imprisonment, she seemed to foresee this outcome. She told her people she had a mission that required her absence for a long time." Horn hesitated, glancing at Atticus, whose expression was serious. "If possible, Mr. Blaine, I hope you won't share this news with them when you meet them. She is dearly loved, and this news would be devastating." Atticus, his face impassive, finished Horn's thought. "And it will intensify the conflict?" A long silence followed, broken only by the gentle breeze that carried away two simultaneous sighs. End of this chapter. Chapter 1008, Unfriendly Contact. The next part of the journey was enveloped in silence. As we ventured deeper, the surrounding woods gradually took on a primitive atmosphere, isolated from the world. Occasionally, dark shadows flitted behind the giant trees and bushes, shrouded in a thin miasma. These were magical creatures dwelling deep within the forbidden forest, all extremely dangerous. Yet, these wild beings refrained from attacking. Magical creatures in the wild possess keen senses, able to detect the aura of destruction surrounding the wizard who floated ahead. Moreover, the centaurs are undoubtedly the dominant force in the forbidden forest, even more formidable than the terrifying eight-eyed spiders. Finally, The group arrived at the former territory of Greyback and his followers. A fallen giant tree and a small rocky hill formed an inconspicuous entrance. Atticus Blaine slowly descended to the ground, his gaze fixed on the centaur elder, Horn. Understanding his intent, Horn reached into his mane, stroking something hidden within. "Mr. Blaine," Firenze hesitated, stepping closer to Atticus. The young and robust centaur, rougher in appearance than humans, wore a look of uncertainty. "Oh, what's troubling you?" Atticus asked gently. Nothing." Firenze noticed Ronan's warning glance, which only deepened his hesitation. He pawed the ground with his front hooves before asking, "How's the Potter boy doing?" "You mean Halima?" Atticus smiled at Firenze. "He's doing well, thriving, in fact. But Firenze, I sense that's not your real concern." "Firenze," Ronan called out in a low voice, and the centaur elder Horn, who had retrieved the key, turned to look at the uneasy Firenze. "You are right, Mr. Blaine." Ronan's stern warning did not deter Firenze. Despite his deep concern, he gritted his teeth and pressed on. "We don't know why you've come to visit the Druids, but—" Firenze took a deep breath of the cold, musty air to steady his racing heart. "Those Druids are kind-hearted humans. Of course, I know Miss Cleona committed an unforgivable crime against wizards, but the people in the secret realm are all innocent?" Atticus completed the thought with a smile. The three centaurs fell silent. Horn held the key to the secret realm tightly, but did not open the door, as if waiting for something. "Do not worry," Atticus reassured them, observing the expressions of the three centaurs. He placed his hands behind his back, gazing at the door to the secret realm, and spoke calmly. "I came to seek their approval. Of course, if we don't reach an agreement, I won't harm anyone." Atticus's assurance visibly relaxed the three centaurs. As descendants of the island of Avalon, they did not wish to see the Druids face destruction. Horn bowed to Atticus, then approached the stump of the giant tree and pressed the emerald-green leaves into a subtle depression on the stump. A vortex of magic, intertwined with gold and green, appeared before Atticus. Though it was his second time entering the secret realm, the scenery still filled Atticus with admiration. The time cycle and weather system here were separate from the outside world. Unlike the rain-soaked world outside, the secret realm remained warm and sunny. Soft golden sunlight bathed the emerald-green lawn and the umbrella-shaped crowns of towering trees. Everything was magnificent, and the fragrance of flowers and the ethereal sound of birds in the air created a deep sense of comfort and relaxation. The towering oak tree in the center of the secret realm stood like a giant holding up the world. Atticus gazed at it quietly, lost in thought. "Happening?" Atticus Blaine thought as he found himself enveloped by the massive wooden hands of the oak tree. The sudden attack had been unexpected, and the force with which the branches closed around him was overwhelming. Just moments ago, he had been introducing himself to Luoya, a little girl with soft gray hair and deep purple eyes, who had shown both fear and curiosity upon meeting him. The children, initially joyful at the sight of the centaurs, had quickly turned wary upon seeing Atticus, a wizard, in their secret realm. Horn, the centaur elder, had tried to reassure Luoya, and Atticus had extended his hand in a gesture of peace. The warmth of their handshake had seemed to calm her, but now chaos had erupted. The voice that had shouted, "Let her go," was filled with anger and fear, and the green light that had shot through the air was a clear sign of hostility. The oak tree, once a symbol of stability, had transformed into a living entity, its branches acting as giant hands intent on capturing Atticus. As the earth trembled beneath him, Atticus quickly assessed his situation. The wooden palms were closing in, their grip tightening with every passing second. He could hear the children's frightened cries and the centaur's urgent calls, but his focus was on freeing himself from the tree's grasp. With a deep breath, Atticus summoned his own magic. He concentrated on the energy within him, channeling it through his body and into the air around him. The pressure of the wooden hands was immense, but he remained calm, visualizing the spell he needed to cast. A soft glow began to emanate from his body, growing brighter as he concentrated. The wooden hands hesitated, as if sensing the power building within him. With a sudden burst of energy, Atticus released a wave of magic that radiated outward, forcing the branches to recoil. The oak tree shuddered, its branches retreating as if burned by an invisible fire. Atticus stood firm, his eyes glowing with determination. The children watched in awe, their fear slowly giving way to wonder. As the dust settled, Atticus turned to face the source of the voice that had initiated the attack. He saw a figure emerging from the shadows, a wizard whose face was a mask of both anger and fear. "Who are you?" Atticus called out, his voice steady despite the recent turmoil. "Why did you attack?" The wizard hesitated, his eyes darting between Atticus and the children. "I thought you were a threat," he finally admitted, his voice tinged with regret. "I was only trying to protect them." Atticus nodded, understanding the wizard's intentions. "I mean no harm," he assured, his tone gentle yet firm. "I am Atticus Blaine, and I am here to help." The tension in the air began to dissipate, and the children slowly approached once more, their curiosity rekindled. Luoya, still holding on to Atticus's hand, looked up at him with newfound trust. "Are you really a teacher in the castle?" she asked again, her voice filled with hope. Atticus smiled warmly, nodding. "Yes, Luoya, I am a teacher, and I promise to teach you all that I can." With that, the atmosphere shifted from one of fear to one of possibility, as the children gathered around Atticus, eager to learn from the wizard who had shown them both strength and kindness. "Elder Horn, what are you doing? Stop it!" Atticus Blaine shouted in alarm, raising his front hooves into the air. The middle-aged man who had leaped to catch Luoya was taken aback. He had assumed that Elder Horn, Frunz, and Ronan were being held hostage, but to his surprise, Elder Horn was actually pleading for the intruder. A soft yet commanding hum resonated in everyone's ears. As soon as Atticus landed, he was shocked to see the oak prison he had conjured emitting tendrils of green smoke. Before he could take any corrective action, the prison, darkening at a speed visible to the naked eye, crumbled into ashes with a gentle breeze. Standing amidst the ashes, a gray-haired young man appeared, his face calm and devoid of any emotion. Flomid, clutching Luoya tightly, felt a shiver run through him. He exclaimed in disbelief, "Are you Mr. Atticus Blaine?" End of this chapter. Chapter 1009, The Future of Druids. "It's just a misunderstanding, Mr. Blaine." With a swift motion, the centaur elder, Horn, leaped in front of Atticus Blaine and the impulsive druid, displaying agility that belied his age. He shouted anxiously, "Flomid doesn't know why you're here. He thinks you're an intruder." Druids clad in sackcloth robes, each wielding staffs of various shapes, gathered behind Flomid. Most of the druids who had entered the secret realm with Atticus displayed overt hostility, but a few among them wore expressions of curiosity, while others seemed surprised. "Mr. Blaine is not an enemy." Horn, fearing that an impatient druid might attack Atticus again and bring disaster to this sanctuary, spread his arms wide to shield Atticus. He implored the druids, "Mr. Blaine is the guardian of the castle. He is here on behalf of the castle to find you." Horn, unaware of Atticus's true intentions, turned to him, seeking guidance. "Okay, Horn, I know this is just a misunderstanding," Atticus said calmly, stepping out from behind Horn to face Flomid, who had just attacked him. This druid seemed to recognize him, which wasn't surprising given Atticus's fame in the magical world long before the druids had migrated here. It wasn't unusual for druids who kept tabs on the magical world to know of him, but Atticus suspected there was more to it. "You know me, don't you?" Atticus asked directly, not concealing his curiosity. The druid's expression grew even more peculiar, and the hostility he had shown dissipated, replaced by a hint of gratitude and embarrassment. After exchanging glances with the druids behind him, who also wore strange expressions, Flomid nodded respectfully to Atticus. "Yes, Mr. Blaine, we know you. I wonder if Miss Cleona has mentioned it to you. We have been searching for you before." A realization dawned on Atticus, and understanding flickered in his eyes. "Ah, I see. Did you follow Miss Cleona to the underground world deep in Nocturne Alley to look for me?" "Later, Miss Cleona came to you alone." Flomid nodded honestly. "You helped us, just as the prophecies of past generations foretold. You assisted Miss Cleona and helped us acquire the staff of the twin snakes." Atticus pursed his lips, clearly recalling an unpleasant memory. Only a few of the most important druids knew this story, while the others learned about it through conversations and were visibly surprised. However, their hostility towards Atticus quietly vanished. "Ah, that's what happened," Atticus mused, his eyebrows arching slightly. Come to think of it, that double snake staff is indeed the most powerful alchemical item I've ever seen. It's still in your possession, right? These druids, who believed in harmony with nature, were straightforward. Flomid nodded happily. Miss Cleona showed it to us once, and she is keeping it now. Oh, Mr. Blaine, you are from the outside world. Do you have any news about Miss Cleona? Do you know when she will return? As soon as this question was posed, the druids all looked expectantly at Atticus. A courageous little girl named Loya peeked out from behind Flomid, her bright eyes fixed on Atticus. Horn, meanwhile, was desperately signaling to Atticus. Atticus remained silent for a moment, then shook his head slightly, causing all the druids to look disappointed. So, what brings you here this time? Flomid had completely lowered his guard. In his view, since Mr. Blaine had helped the druids retrieve the staff of the twin snakes from the island of Avalon and entered the secret realm accompanied by the centaurs, it was evident that Miss Cleona had. Miss Cleon must have believed that Atticus Blaine was completely trustworthy, which is why she granted him access to the secret realm. I've come here to discuss something with you and to return something, Atticus said with a smile. Several thick branches intertwined to form the support of the mid-air terrace beneath his feet. Atticus stood on the edge of a platform, hundreds of feet above the ground, inhaling the refreshing fragrance carried by the breeze. As far as the eye could see, there were lush jungles, golden waves of wheat, sparkling lakes, and emerald-green lawns. Men were farming, women were weaving, and there was a harmonious coexistence between man and nature. Turning around, Fromide had already prepared tea for Horn and himself, who were sitting cross-legged on the ground. Atticus walked back to the simple, primitive square table and sat down. He picked up the wooden cup, with a few unknown green leaves floating on its surface, and sniffed it, feeling a cool sensation rush to his forehead. "Thank you for your help with the druids, Mr. Blaine," Fromide said sincerely, raising his teacup to Atticus. "You helped us acquire the double snake staff, provided us with supplies, and even returned it to the altar for us. We will always remember your assistance." Cleona's assistant had mentioned that last winter, Cleona, in the guise of Moody, had come to him to sign for an advance on her salary. At that time, Atticus had given Vitya some gold to help her people through difficult times. It seemed Vitya had not taken undue credit, likely informing Fromide and others that the food came from the support of the castle managers. As for the altar, during the second match, Vidya had used the altar's large-scale teleportation function to transport Harry and others out of Hogwarts. Later, after Voldemort's resurrection, the altar seemed to attempt to bring them back to Hogwarts, but the transmission was interrupted by Voldemort, and the altar returned to the bottom of the lake. When Atticus returned, he retrieved the altar from the water once more. The altar, capable of large-scale teleportation, was a precious alchemical item. Unfortunately, the power that drove it was the druid's divine arts, not the wizard's magic. Divine magic is a blend of the druid's beliefs and magic. In other words, unless one believes in the druid's beliefs, they cannot wield the power of divine magic. Returning it to the druids was not something Atticus had planned in advance. It was an idea that had simply come to him. "It's just a small favor, Fromide. Don't worry about it," Atticus said with a smile. "After all, we are neighbors now, aren't we?" "I also need to thank you and Elder Horn," Fromide said. "We know that this ancient forest is under the jurisdiction of the Centaur tribe in Hogwarts. We cannot remain here without your permission." Many worlds ago, the Centaurs lived alongside the druids on the island of Avalon, Fromide. "Our ancestors were all taught by the great Merlin, and we should help each other," Horn said in a hoarse voice, his eyes fixed on Atticus. Atticus took a leisurely sip of the drink that could be considered tea, showing no false humility in his gratitude to Fromide. "Now that you have settled here, Fromide," Atticus said gently, "have you thought about the future?" The question left Fromide looking puzzled. Their plan for the future was to recuperate in the Forbidden Forest. Sensing the doubts in Fromide's heart, Atticus continued calmly. "I want to correct a misconception, Fromide. The Forbidden Forest is neither the territory of the Centaurs nor Hogwarts. It belongs to the British wizarding world." Under the stern gaze of Fromide and Horn, Atticus remained composed. "Since you have chosen to settle here, It signifies that you have decided to leave the past behind. Have you thought about how to integrate into this community? Atticus Blaine pondered the question as he contemplated leaving behind his life of wandering, constantly pursued by the church. He was on the brink of officially joining the British wizarding world, a decision that would change his life forever. End of this chapter. Chapter 1010. Have you heard of Azkaban? Contributing to the wizarding world. Fromid and the old centaur, Horn, exchanged puzzled glances, each seeing the confusion mirrored in the other's eyes. For centuries, druids had roamed the European continent, migrating between various primeval forests and border towns. Whenever a place became uninhabitable, they simply moved on to another. Their current stay in the Forbidden Forest was intended to be temporary, and they hadn't considered the notion of paying rent for occupying magical territory. Mr. Blaine, Horn finally spoke, his voice stiff. We centaurs are part of the magical world, often seen as heretics by wizards. Yet, wizards have never asked us to contribute to the magical world. This is different, Horn, Atticus Blaine replied, gently tracing the rim of his cup. You have been part of the wizarding world for millennia. You are already integrated into the fabric of magic. Therefore, it is only natural for wizards to protect you. With all due respect, Mr. Blaine, the centaurs have seen no such protection from wizards, Horn retorted, his voice deep and resonant. Wizards have enacted laws to combat smuggling and poaching. Isn't that a form of protection for the centaurs? Atticus countered with a smile, leaving Horn momentarily speechless. Without these laws as a deterrent, poachers would swarm your tribe, not just the occasional intruder. Turning his attention to the silent Fromid, Atticus continued, the centaur's example should inspire you. For thousands of years, you fought the church alone, resulting in displacement and heavy casualties. Moreover, Atticus emphasized, you haven't effectively promoted your ideas. Fromid opened his mouth but remained silent, the weight of the issue beyond his immediate control. If you gain the wizard's approval, the Vatican will have to tread carefully. Should they dare to send people to the Forbidden Forest, they must consider the consequences of provoking a war with wizards. A rustling noise came from behind the door, leading to the trunk of the massive oak tree, but Atticus ignored the eavesdropping children, sipping his tea leisurely as he continued with his shocking proposal. Have you ever considered offering an elective course at Hogwarts to share your ideas and magic with the students there? Fromid's hand trembled, knocking over his cup. Ignoring the spill, he stared at Atticus in horror. You would allow us to teach at the school? I must remind you, Mr. Blaine, if the Vatican found out, they would be furious. The proposal was so revolutionary that even the old centaur Horn was left speechless. He had never imagined Atticus Blaine would be so open-minded. Why not? Atticus smiled. The exchange and interaction between different magical systems can lead to a more brilliant civilization. Of course, if you accept this invitation, the ideas you wish to impart to the young wizards must be carefully vetted. I won't allow any extreme ideologies to enter Hogwarts. As for the Vatican, if they take drastic actions, I will personally address the matter as the Vice President of the International Confederation of Wizards. The howling wind outside couldn't drown out Fromid's heavy breathing, and the unexpected offer left his cheeks slightly flushed. For thousands of years, their suffering stemmed from their refusal to abandon the spread of druidic ideas. They still hope to let more people hear the voice of nature, which is the divine right of King's Church finds it utterly intolerable to accept certain beliefs. In this extraordinary world, wizards are also considered heretics by the Church. However, the influence of this heresy has grown so formidable that the Church can only begrudgingly tolerate it. You belong to this world, and you cannot be separated from it, Atticus Blaine said gently, glancing at the little girl who stood excitedly behind the small door, her fists clenched. If you choose to teach at Hogwarts, your descendants will also have the right to study there and receive a proper magical education. Clang! The small door, embedded in the thick branches, swung open accidentally. Several children tumbled out, rolling across the wooden corridor like a jumble of monks. What are you doing? Fromid, wrestling with his conscience, looked grim. Get out and don't disturb the guests. The children, who had quickly scrambled to their feet, hunched their shoulders, lowered their heads, and retreated behind the door, one by one. Sorry for the disturbance. Flomid apologized, bowing slightly. No problem. Atticus waved his hand with a smile. It seems the children here are all eager to learn about Hogwarts. This was something that needed no concealment. Flomid nodded, a hint of bitterness in his expression. Yes, they are very curious about that magical school, especially Loya, who dreams of studying magic there and entering Gryffindor House. But, the sincere middle-aged man pursed his lips. You know, this isn't something I can decide. If Miss Cleopatra doesn't return, the fate of your people should be in your own hands, Flomid, rather than waiting for someone to save you, Atticus interrupted, silencing Flomid once more. Mr. Blaine, Oldhorn's voice interjected at the right moment. He glanced at Flomid, who was visibly moved. This matter is of great importance. Can you give them some time to consider it? Also, Mr. Blaine, if the Druids decide to teach at Hogwarts and seek protection from the wizarding world, what will they need to offer in return? If I recall correctly, you mentioned that the Druids must contribute before they can enjoy the benefits. Flomid's expression shifted slightly. He had been so absorbed in the promises made by Atticus that he had forgotten nothing comes without a price. They would need to offer remuneration to the magical world to silence any dissent. A small personal request, Atticus began. Some of my friends may be in danger. If you don't mind, I hope to establish a temporary residence for them in this secret place. That's no problem, Mr. Blaine, Flomid agreed without hesitation, much to Atticus's slight surprise. This made his suggestion, which he had initially doubted, seem feasible. As for the wizards accepting the Druids and ensuring their legacy, the price you need to pay is... Under the suddenly intense gazes of Flomid and Oldhorn, Atticus finished the last sip of tea in his cup. He stood up slowly, looking down at Flomid, a faint chill in the air around him. Have you ever heard of the wizard prison Azkaban? End of this chapter. Chapter 1011, Surrender or Destruction. A heavy rain disrupted the daily routine of Atticus Blaine and his friends. After dinner, the floodwaters that pooled on the marble steps thwarted their plans for morning exercises. However, this unexpected deluge brought a sense of adventure to the young wizards. Fred and George were the first to shed their robes and leap into the makeshift ocean, splashing about with glee. They were soon joined by Neville Longbottom and several Hufflepuff students, and before long, a throng of boys had plunged into the water, their laughter echoing through the air. Dozens of heads bobbed in the rippling water, a sight both chaotic and exhilarating. Professor McGonagall, who had returned to her office to work overtime after lunch, glanced out her window and was startled to see the young wizards frolicking in the water. Her heart nearly stopped, and she almost leaped out of her office in alarm. Rushing downstairs to assess the situation, her fury was palpable, causing the flames of the torches in the hallway to flicker in response. Each student who had taken part in the aquatic escapade lost 10 points and faced a week of detention. With so many students punished, Filch would have no shortage of helpers for his tasks until the end of the term. Where are Potter and Weasley? Don't tell me they're still in the water. Professor McGonagall demanded, her voice sharp as she surveyed the drenched students who stood with heads bowed, enduring her reprimand. Her eyes scanned the crowd, searching for Harry and Ron, whom she assumed had joined in the reckless fun. When she didn't spot them, her heart skipped a beat. Oh, here we are, Professor McGonagall. Harry and Ron called out from the stairs leading to the second floor, where they stood with their classmates, observing the spectacle. Ron raised his hand, grinning. You didn't go down? Professor McGonagall asked, her surprise evident as she noted their dry clothes. She nodded approvingly. Very wise, gentlemen. It seems you finally realized that your behavior should reflect your age, unlike you, Mr. Longbottom. She turned her gaze to Neville, who smiled sheepishly. You, Mr. Longbottom, are usually so modest and prudent. I will be writing to your grandmother and parents about today's events. And you, Fred and George, if you wish, your parents can come to Hogwarts to take you home. This is totally unfair, Ron muttered as the crowd was ushered upstairs by Professor McGonagall. He shrugged and said to Harry, She thought we must have gone into the water too. Well, you did plan to, didn't you, Ron? Hermione teased, chuckling. You only escape punishment because you promised to help me practice spells tonight." With the third game of the championship approaching, the Warriors had begun their preparations. Although the details of the competition remained a mystery, it was clear that the event would test their courage, skills, and magical problem-solving abilities. Since late May, Harry and Ron had been dedicating time to assist Hermione with her practice. It was 9 o'clock in the evening when they left the abandoned classroom and returned to the Gryffindor common room. Without the need for an invisibility cloak, Hermione used her newly mastered disillusionment charm to help them avoid Mrs. Norris's watchful eyes. As they entered the common room through the portrait hole behind the fat lady, they found the celebratory dinner still in full swing, honoring the Gryffindors who had braved the water earlier. Neville stood on a table, regaling Dean with tales of how, if not for Professor McGonagall's intervention, he would have swum into the Black Lake to meet the mermaids. In a flash, Ron was whisked away by Lavender, leaving Harry to ponder the evening's events. Night. Harry hesitated for a moment, his hand hovering over the door. He considered knocking, but decided against it. Instead, he leaned closer, trying to listen for any signs of life within. The silence was profound, broken only by the distant hoot of an owl outside. Feeling a mix of frustration and relief, Harry turned away from the door. He had hoped to find answers, but perhaps it was for the best that he didn't disturb Professor Blaine at such an hour. As he retraced his steps through the dimly lit corridors, his thoughts were a tangled web of confusion and fear. The castle was eerily quiet, the only sound being the soft padding of his feet on the stone floor. The moonlight streaming through the windows cast long shadows, making the familiar hallways seem foreign and mysterious. Harry's mind wandered back to the unsettling feelings he had been grappling with. The anger, the inexplicable urge to harm Percy and Professor Blaine. It was as if something dark and foreign had taken root within him. He shook his head, trying to dispel the troubling thoughts. He needed to talk to someone, but who? Hermione was perceptive and would undoubtedly offer her help, but he wasn't ready to share these dark impulses with her. Not yet. As he reached the entrance to the Gryffindor common room, the fat lady's portrait swung open with a grumble, allowing him passage. Harry slipped inside, the warmth of the room a stark contrast to the chill of the corridors. He removed the invisibility cloak and folded it neatly, placing it back in his bag. The common room was empty, the fire reduced to glowing embers. Harry sank into one of the armchairs, staring into the dying flames. He felt a heavy weight on his chest, a burden he couldn't quite name. He knew he couldn't ignore this feeling forever. Sooner or later, he would have to confront whatever was happening to him. But for now, he allowed himself a moment of respite, closing his eyes and letting the warmth of the fire lull him into a restless sleep. Night had fallen, and Atticus Blaine lingered outside Professor Brian's door, hoping the professor might rise for a late-night trip to the bathroom and inadvertently discover him. Unfortunately, after waiting for half an hour, the office remained silent, with no sign of movement. A sigh echoed through the ancient stone corridor as Atticus reluctantly acknowledged that his plan for the evening had failed. As he made his way back down the corridor, Atticus noticed a light still burning in the small tower where Professor Dumbledore's office was located. It seemed the headmaster was still awake. Atticus hesitated, contemplating whether he should try his luck with Professor Dumbledore, hoping for some unexpected insight or opportunity. Suddenly, a sharp click echoed through the air. In a corner of the Forbidden Forest, a golden bolt of lightning struck from the cloudless night sky. The immense pressure from the accompanying wind left Atticus momentarily stunned, his vision blurring with fear. In the next moment, a massive wave of golden fire erupted from the dark horizon, spreading across the Forbidden Forest like a vast canopy. The brilliant light was so intense that Atticus momentarily believed the sun had risen. "I'll only say it once," a high-pitched, icy voice boomed, resonating across the Forbidden Forest, Hogwarts, and even reaching Hogsmeade. "Submission or destruction, these are the only two choices you have." With a deafening boom, chaos erupted at Hogwarts. End of this chapter. Chapter then 12, Panic. In the distance, Hogsmeade lay quiet, while nearby, Hogwarts was suddenly alive with activity. After a cold, sharp voice pierced the night, lights flickered on in the houses, twinkling like stars. Harry felt the floorboards vibrating beneath his feet, not from an explosion, but from the hurried footsteps of hundreds of young wizards and faculty members rushing out of their beds and down the stairs. "It's Professor Blaine," Harry thought, his heart racing. The magnificent golden sea of fire and the chilling voice that seemed to pierce the soul left no doubt in his mind. But how could it be? Harry had never seen Professor Atticus Blaine so furious, so much so that he forgot to control the impact, alarming both Hogwarts and Hogsmeade. Suddenly, a fierce whistling wind swept through, and the sea of fire vanished without warning. Yet, its intense heat lingered, evaporating the rainwater in the forbidden forest and forming a sunset-colored cloud above the lush jungle. The scorching wind made Harry squint as he lay in the corridor. The noise from upstairs grew louder, signaling that his classmates were already dressed and rushing out of the common room to investigate. He could even hear Filch's frantic shouting. Harry knew he had to act. He tore off his invisibility cloak. There was no need to hide with so many students out of bed. He sprinted down the corridor, leaping to the transfer platform between the third and second floors in 2 giant strides, and dashed across the second-floor platform like the wind. As he reached the entrance hall, he was eager to rush out of the castle, but the sight of 3 figures standing before the towering bronze door made him stop in his tracks, horrified. "Ah, I knew you'd be the fastest, Harry." Sirius Black turned with a playful smile as Harry bounded down the stairs. "Sirius, what are you?" Harry began, but his words were cut short by Professor Dumbledore, who stood calmly in a purple robe, his gaze silencing Harry. "Oh, Professor Dumbledore, I just got up to go to the bathroom, so I was a little quick," Harry stammered. "Yes," Professor Dumbledore replied, his voice calm. "The truth is obviously that." He turned away, ignoring Harry. Beside Dumbledore stood an old man of similar height, with a white beard and blue eyes. He sneered, leaving Harry, whose face was flushed, confused. "That's Aberforth Dumbledore," Sirius explained, walking over with a smile and placing an arm around Harry's shoulders. "He's usually at the Hogshead. I'm sure you've seen him, Harry." Harry blinked, realizing who the old man was. The name Aberforth Dumbledore meant something significant. Harry was so surprised to learn that Dumbledore had a brother that he forgot to ask Sirius why he was at Hogwarts so late at night to meet with Professor Dumbledore. The next person to arrive in the entrance hall was Harry's least favorite potions professor. Snape rushed over from the Slytherin basement, his intense running leaving him sweating profusely. Yet Harry admired how Snape managed to keep his black robe tightly wrapped even in such an unexpected situation. When their eyes met Sirius's, both men's expressions turned cold. Fortunately, they refrained from engaging in a verbal spat. Instead, Professor Snape simply looked away and strode over to Dumbledore's side. "Is it Atticus?" Severus asked, though his tone was more of a statement than a question, his gaze fixed in the direction of the disturbance. Atticus Blaine stood at the edge of the forbidden forest, his face set in a stern expression as fire clouds loomed overhead. "Obviously." Dumbledore glanced at Severus Snape, speaking with a calm assurance. "Don't worry, Severus. Atticus is no longer the young wizard he once was. Nothing can endanger his life now. He has returned." Harry noticed an oil lamp emerging from Hagrid's hut, pausing at the forest's border as if in conversation with someone. Suddenly, the doors leading to the basement swung open with a clang. Almost simultaneously, a group of Slytherins led by Malfoy and Nodder, Hufflepuff students led by Cedric, surged up from below. Harry also spotted his Gryffindor classmates on the second-floor platform, their faces marked with surprise as Ron and Hermione saw him standing beside Sirius. "What's going on, Albus? What happened? Who is Atticus fighting? Could it be?" Professor McGonagall's voice, sharp and panicked, cut through the murmurs of the young wizards. She pushed through the crowd, descending the stairs with difficulty. "Don't worry, Minerva. Nothing has happened. I believe Professor Blaine was merely addressing some safety concerns and inadvertently caused a disturbance." Dumbledore's voice boomed through the entrance hall in the Great Hall. "Oh, addressing safety concerns and causing unexpected disturbances," Fred muttered. "Do you believe it, brother?" "I don't believe it," George replied. "Do you?" "I don't believe it either," Fred said, wrinkling his nose. "Who would?" The two brothers exchanged a glance and clapped their hands. Except for Hermione, who rolled her eyes at them, the other students who overheard their conversation chuckled. However, when Dumbledore's calm yet piercing gaze swept over them, the laughter ceased. "What happened, Albus?" The question came again, this time from the headmistress of Beauxbatons, who hurried across the wet ground. To Harry's surprise, Fleur, clad in sky-blue silk pajamas, followed Madame Maxime with a worried expression. The lights from Durmstrang's large ship on the Black Lake flickered on, and a crowd began to gather and approach Hogwarts. "All is well, ma'am," Dumbledore reassured in his steady voice. "Atticus will explain the details to us later. Now," he turned to the students gathered in the Great Hall. "Minerva, Severus, please ensure all students return to their dormitories to rest. They need to be well rested for tomorrow's classes." Without delay, Professor McGonagall summoned the head boy and girl, along with the prefects of each house, to usher the students back upstairs amid a chorus of dissatisfied grumbles. Severus merely glanced at Malfoy and the other Slytherins, who obediently retreated. The crowd dispersed like a receding tide, and the professors who arrived later helped maintain order to prevent any chaos. "Aberforth," Dumbledore addressed his brother once more, "the villagers of Hogsmeade must be confused and anxious. Could you return and help reassure them?" Aberforth cast an unhappy glance at Dumbledore, but under his brother's calm and resolute gaze, said nothing and strode toward the school gate. "Dumbledore," Sirius called out with a smile, waving his hand. "You understand the situation. I'll be leaving soon, but before I go, may I have a word with Harry? It won't disturb his rest." A loud cough echoed from upstairs, unmistakably Hermione's. "Oh, and Ron and Hermione, if you don't mind, Minerva?" Sirius asked, smiling at Professor McGonagall. Professor McGonagall glared at Sirius sternly, her expression unyielding. Sirius guided the students to evacuate in an orderly fashion. "Come on, let's talk over here," he said, placing one arm around Harry's shoulders. With his other hand, he gestured to Ron and Hermione, who were making their way through the crowd, to join them. He led the trio to a quieter corridor on the first floor of the Great Hall. Meanwhile, Atticus Blaine bid farewell to the flustered Hagrid and made his way toward the castle. End of this chapter. Chapter 1013, The Whole Story. Atticus Blaine strode across the damp grass, making his way toward the castle. He halted at the base of the marble steps, where Dumbledore and Madame Maxime stood side by side, their eyes fixed intently on him. Fleur emerged hurriedly in her nightgown, her hands clasped in front of her chest, her face etched with concern. After ensuring all the students were safely inside, Severus and Minerva quickly joined the gathering outside the hall. "Oh, apologies. It seems I've caused quite a stir," Atticus remarked with a smile, appearing to be in high spirits. Dumbledore's silver beard, illuminated by the golden glow of the torches, fluttered gently in the breeze. His piercing gaze remained locked on Atticus's face, his silence speaking volumes. Professor McGonagall mirrored his expression, her face marked with worry. Madame Maxime and Fleur, not being part of the Hogwarts staff, wisely chose to remain silent. "Who were you fighting with?" Severus asked bluntly, stepping forward. His pale face and dark eyes were filled with anger. "You know the Forbidden Forest is home to a large colony of acromantulas." Atticus remained unfazed, smiling. "These dark creatures have overrun the Forbidden Forest, encroaching on the habitats of other creatures. They devour everything, including human flesh. So, I took measures to curb their numbers." "What prompted you to do this now, Atticus?" Dumbledore inquired quietly. "Oh, it's in preparation for the upcoming Triwizard Tournament. I don't want these creatures causing disruptions during the third task," Atticus replied, meeting Dumbledore's gaze with calm assurance. The tension in the air seemed to dissipate with the breeze. "Aragog, the old spider, is a friend of Hagrid's," Dumbledore sighed after a pause. "You've thought this through, Atticus. It's necessary to impose restrictions for the students' safety. But you must understand, Hagrid has a deep bond with Aragog. Hurting it would also hurt Hagrid." "That's precisely why I made such a commotion," Atticus shrugged, his demeanor relaxed. "The old spider is quite stubborn. Its defeat in the previous conflict with the centaurs has made it more irritable and aggressive. It refused to heed my warnings. To prevent greater conflict and casualties, I had to make a big noise to scare it off." Is that so? Dumbledore's frown softened, and he exhaled slowly. No casualties? Perhaps a few smaller spiders were frightened to death, but Aragog is unharmed. They've agreed to move deeper into the Forbidden Forest, Atticus stated candidly. Dumbledore fell silent again, but his expression softened considerably. My apologies, madam. Atticus turned to Madame Maxime, bowing slightly. I disturbed your and your students' rest. It's quite all right, Atticus, Maxime replied cautiously. You're here for the third task. Are you planning to hold it in the Forbidden Forest? Fleur, standing beside Maxime, perked up, her eyes alight with curiosity. Victor, who had led the Durmstrang students to investigate the commotion, also showed interest. He glanced toward the dark, ancient forest, his thin shoulders trembling slightly. In the corridor, several heads peeked out, their expressions filled with excitement. I suspected this might be the case, Harry murmured quietly. That's exactly the plan, Atticus confirmed with a nod, revealing just enough to satisfy their curiosity. Madame Maxime also turned her gaze toward the Forbidden Forest, deep in thought. Well, that's enough for tonight, Atticus said, turning his attention to the Durmstrang students. You can go back and rest, Victor said, as he began to lead his classmates away. After Madame Maxime bid farewell to Dumbledore, she took Fleur's hand and descended the stairs. Fleur's gaze lingered on Atticus Blaine until they were out of sight. Were they discussing the spider, ma'am? Fleur's voice, carried by the breeze, reached Maxime as she sought her advice. This is not something we can intervene in, Fleur. It's best not to get too involved, Maxime cautioned. Now, only a few people remained in front of the entrance hall at Hogwarts, and aside from Atticus Blaine, they were all members of the Order of the Phoenix. The Dark Lord will know what happened tonight, Severus said, his face pale, speaking in a matter-of-fact tone. Dumbledore did not respond immediately, but looked at Atticus, who nodded after a brief pause. Then, Dumbledore turned his gaze toward the corridor beside the entrance hall. Sirius, what are you doing at Hogwarts? Atticus inquired. Oh, I'm here to tell you something. Ahem. Dumbledore already knows the situation. You can ask him about it. I'm in a hurry and need to leave after speaking with Harry briefly, so I won't catch up with you, Atticus, Sirius said, retracting his head guiltily and pulling Harry and the others to a more distant spot. What on earth did he say? Atticus raised an eyebrow. The school board held a private meeting, Dumbledore explained calmly. More than 2/3 of the directors agree that the Malfoy family should return to the school board. Malfoy is going back to the board? Professor McGonagall's voice was filled with anger. She glared at Severus and then looked at Dumbledore with concern. What will happen then, Albus? Something we can anticipate, Dumbledore replied. Oh, don't worry, Minerva. We can handle it. Atticus also reassured her. Don't worry, Professor McGonagall. We may encounter some turbulence, but it will soon subside. Meanwhile, Sirius had led Harry and the others to a more secluded area. Harry, noticing Sirius's unease, asked, What's going on, Sirius? You seem a bit off. Do I? Sirius wiped the sweat from his forehead and glanced around to ensure no one was following them. You don't seem eager to see Professor Blaine, do you, Sirius? Hermione observed, narrowing her eyes suspiciously. Oh, it's nothing. I just, ahem. Sirius hesitated, noticing the curiosity in Harry and the others' eyes. In a timid tone, he continued, Some things aren't suitable for you to know. Ahem, it's like this. Sirius turned to Ron. Your brother, Ron. I mean Percy. Oh, Percy? Ron exclaimed angrily. What foolish thing has he done now? Not so foolish this time, Sirius replied, recalling how Percy had come to Hogwarts, pleading with Atticus to allow Umbridge into the school. He's resigned from the Ministry of Magic and is currently working in Remus's workshop with his girlfriend, Penelope Clearwater. Percy quitting the ministry and rekindling his relationship with Penelope? This unexpected news left Harry and the others bewildered. These developments were so surprising that they didn't know where to begin expressing their disbelief. And one more thing, Sirius said, his expression turning serious. He looked at Harry and the others, who were now attentive. This is also why I came to Hogwarts. The Hogwarts Board of Directors held a meeting, and I attended on behalf of the Black family. Wait, Hermione exclaimed. The Black family is on the school board? Why, didn't I mention this? Sirius scratched his head. But, Harry interjected, shocked. In the second year, Lucius Malfoy was said to have gained the support of all the school board directors to expel Professor Dumbledore from Hogwarts. Sirius exclaimed with an air of innocence. "Oh, it's not my fault, Harry. I was still in Azkaban at the time, so I couldn't oppose Lucius Malfoy's little scheme. But that's all in the past now. What I want to tell you is that, with the backing of the Ministry of Magic, the Malfoy family has regained their position on the Hogwarts Board of Governors. You see, Hogwarts might be facing some challenges." End of this chapter. Chapter 1014, Ultimatum. As everyone had anticipated, the events of the previous night quickly became the hottest topic at Hogwarts. From breakfast through morning classes and into the afternoon, the castle buzzed with the chatter of young wizards discussing the incident. Harry marveled at his classmates' knack for gathering information. Only he, Ron, and Hermione had overheard the conversation between Professor Atticus Blaine and Professor Dumbledore, and under Sirius's stern warning, they had kept it to themselves. Yet by midday, it was common knowledge that Professor Blaine had confronted the eight-eyed spiders in the Forbidden Forest, driving them deeper into its depths. The news thrilled everyone except Hagrid. "Hagrid didn't come to lunch," Harry whispered to Ron, glancing at the conspicuously empty seat at the staff table in the Great Hall. "He missed breakfast, too." "Ron, Hagrid must be feeling awful." Ron, who had been listening to Neville's enthusiastic musings about forming a team to venture into the Forbidden Forest, turned to Harry with a sympathetic look. "But Professor Blaine did the right thing, didn't he, Harry? Nobody likes those terrifying spiders except Hagrid. And as you heard, Professor Blaine just chased them deeper into the forest instead of capturing them all. That was merciful enough." Harry recalled his own harrowing encounter with Aragog, the giant spider, when he and Ron had accidentally stumbled into the spider's territory while pursuing Peter Pettigrew. It had been a terrifying ordeal, and even after revealing their friendship with Hagrid, the malevolent old spider had shown no mercy. To be honest, Harry didn't think Professor Blaine had been too harsh on the spiders, but he couldn't ignore Hagrid's feelings. "The Daily Prophet has published." Hermione's voice broke through Harry's thoughts. She sat across from him, her face emerging from behind the newspaper with a deep breath. "What?" Harry asked, taken aback. "The Daily Prophet published the story about Professor Blaine expelling the eight-eyed spiders. They're surprisingly well-informed." "Don't be silly, Harry. Of course, the Daily Prophet is well-informed," Hermione sighed, exasperated by Harry's surprise. "But they won't make a big deal out of it now, because it would only increase Professor Blaine's fame, which the Ministry of Magic doesn't want. What I mean is—" Hermione handed the newspaper to Harry. "Sirius told us last night that the Malfoys have returned to the Hogwarts Board of Governors. Look at those Slytherin students." Hermione nodded towards the Slytherin table, her tone dripping with disdain. Harry and Ron immediately turned to look at Malfoy. Fred, George, and Neville, who had been listening, also glanced over. "Oh, that little piece of trash," Fred muttered, snorting. "He's back to being smug, isn't he?" Fred's assessment wasn't entirely fair. While Draco wore a slight smirk, he wasn't overly arrogant. It was the sycophantic expressions of the students around him, congratulating him, that made Harry feel queasy. Neville, observing Malfoy as he nonchalantly dealt with his admirers, quickly glanced at the newspaper in Harry's hand before turning to Hermione. "What does this mean?" All eyes were on Neville, whose face had turned pale. "The Malfoys are back on the board. The Daily Prophet is making a big deal out of it, so the Ministry of Magic is behind this?" Harry and Ron exchanged worried looks, understanding the implications of the Malfoys' return to power. Looked pleased with the interruption, so she quickly interjected, trying to smooth over the situation. "Perhaps this can wait, Mr. Bode. The minister is on his way to an important engagement." Bode, however, seemed unfazed by Umbridge's attempt to dismiss him. "I'm afraid it can't wait, Miss Umbridge. It's a matter of utmost urgency." Fudge sighed, clearly irritated by the delay. "Very well, Bode. Make it quick," he grumbled, snatching the document from Bode's outstretched hand. He scanned the paper briefly, his expression shifting from annoyance to mild interest. "This is indeed important," he conceded, scribbling his signature with a flourish before handing it back. "Thank you, Minister," Bode replied, his voice as flat as his expression. He he stepped aside, allowing Fudge, Umbridge, and Malfoy to continue on their way. As they entered the elevator, Fudge's earlier excitement returned. Now, where were we? Ah, yes, Hogwarts. I can already picture the scene, he said, a gleam of anticipation in his eyes. Meanwhile, back at Hogwarts, the atmosphere in the Great Hall was tense. Atticus Blaine, seated beside Professor Dumbledore, exchanged a worried glance with him. The arrival of Lucius Malfoy and the toad-like woman in pink had not gone unnoticed, and whispers spread like wildfire among the students. "What do you think they're planning?" Harry whispered to Hermione, his voice barely audible over the murmurs. "I'm not sure," Hermione replied, her brow furrowed in thought. "But it can't be good. We need to be prepared for anything." As the doors to the Great Hall swung open once more, all eyes turned to the entrance. Fudge, Umbridge, and Malfoy strode in, their presence commanding immediate attention. The room fell silent, the air thick with anticipation and dread. Professor Dumbledore rose to greet them, his expression calm but his eyes sharp. "Minister Fudge, to what do we owe the pleasure of your visit?" he asked, his voice steady. Fudge smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Professor Dumbledore, Professor Blaine," he began, nodding to each in turn. "I'm here to discuss some changes that the Ministry believes are necessary for the betterment of Hogwarts." Atticus Blaine's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, allowing Dumbledore to take the lead. "And what changes might those be, Minister?" Dumbledore inquired, his tone polite but firm. Fudge's smile widened, and he gestured to Umbridge, who stepped forward with a self-satisfied smirk. "Allow me to introduce Dolores Umbridge, the new High Inquisitor of Hogwarts," he announced, his voice ringing with authority. A collective gasp echoed through the hall, and Harry felt a chill run down his spine. The implications of this appointment were clear, and none of them boded well for the future of the school. As the students and faculty absorbed the news, Atticus Blaine exchanged a knowing look with Dumbledore. They both understood that this was just the beginning of a challenging new chapter for Hogwarts, one that would test their resolve and unity like never before. She didn't know this man at all, so she whispered a reminder and then addressed Baudelaire sharply. "Broderick, the minister has urgent business to attend to. If you have anything to report, please do so when we return. But I need to go to Azkaban to inspect and ensure the Dementors are still under our control. You understand the importance of this matter," Bodhi insisted, his words somewhat clumsy. Meanwhile, Malfoy, standing behind Fudge, cast a quick, apprehensive glance at Bode. "Dementors of Azkaban. Very well," Fudge muttered, frowning. Despite his irritation, he recognized the necessity of the situation. He accepted the document Bode handed him, scrutinized it carefully, and signed his name at the bottom. In a rather absurd turn of events, Broderick Bode rushed into the elevator first, yanked the door grill shut, and pressed the button to descend, leaving the Minister of Magic stranded outside. Is this man out of his mind? Fudge thought angrily. The interruption jolted Fudge from his earlier excitement, bringing him back to his senses. He glanced at the appointment letter in his hand, rolled his eyes, and handed it back to Umbridge. "It just occurred to me," Fudge began, his eyes flickering with a sudden realization as he spoke to Umbridge, who looked slightly confused. "I have some urgent matters to attend to, Dolores. I've been putting them off for too long, and they must be addressed immediately. You and Lucius will go to Hogwarts together to announce this appointment." End of this chapter. Chapter 10 and 15, Bringing Humiliation Upon Oneself. As Dolores Umbridge and Lucius Malfoy entered the hall, the once lively chatter abruptly ceased. The young wizards turned their attention to the haughty Umbridge, while those with parents in the Ministry of Magic appeared visibly uneasy. This wasn't Harry's first encounter with Dolores Umbridge, and though he understood her purpose at Hogwarts, he couldn't help but mutter through clenched teeth, "What is she doing here? Is that even necessary?" Hermione retorted, her face flushed with anger. She glanced over at the Slytherin table, curious about Draco Malfoy's reaction to his father's presence alongside a high-ranking ministry official. To her surprise, Draco's pale face betrayed not joy, but a mix of deep unease and panic. At the faculty table, the professors rose from their seats, their expressions cold and unwelcoming. Some couldn't hide their hostility. Dumbledore and Atticus Blaine, however, remained composed. "I'm here, Dumbledore, Blaine," Umbridge announced as she reached the faculty table. Her face twisted with a smug smile, and her sharp voice echoed in the silent hall. It was a moment of confrontation, and Umbridge reveled in it. "Despite your efforts to keep me away, Dumbledore and Blaine, I've arrived." Malfoy tried to reassure himself that everything was going according to plan. Yet he couldn't stop the sweat from forming as he caught Blaine's gaze. Inwardly, he pitied Umbridge for her arrogance. "Hogwarts never turns away those with good intentions, Madam Umbridge," Dumbledore replied, his tone calm yet firm. "Unless, of course, their intentions are not so pure." Atticus Blaine glanced at Dumbledore, surprised by the sharpness of his words. It was clear that the Ministry's persistence had tested Dumbledore's patience. "Say what you will, Dumbledore." Umbridge sneered, abandoning any pretense of respect for the esteemed wizard. "The Ministry of Magic will prevail in the end. And let me remind those who are still deluded or confused." She cast a mocking glance at Professor McGonagall, who glared back fiercely. "Any defiance against the Minister of Magic and the established order will end in disgrace. Hogwarts does not seek conflict with the Ministry, Madam Umbridge. We merely aim to reveal the truth, a truth the current Ministry is too afraid to confront," Dumbledore responded, his voice steady. He glanced towards the Gryffindor table, noting Harry's furious expression, which gave him pause. "I suggest we don't disrupt the students' meal over a mere ideological disagreement, Madam Umbridge. Perhaps we could continue this discussion in my office, where I assume you have brought directives from the Ministry." "Not from the Ministry, but from the Hogwarts Board of Governors," Umbridge corrected with a smirk. "Why retreat to your office, Dumbledore? This seems like the perfect setting." Turning to face the hall, Umbridge's eyes swept over the resistant faces at the 4 long tables. Some students shrank back, avoiding her gaze. "The students are all present, and I have a few truths to reveal, primarily to dispel some lies." Dumbledore's expression finally hardened, his eyes growing cold. He was unconcerned about his own authority being challenged, but Umbridge's intent to spread falsehoods in front of the students was intolerable. "Oh, ha! You want to discuss this here?" Atticus Blaine finally spoke, his chuckle resonating in Lucius's ears, causing his heart to skip a beat. Instinctively, Lucius took 2 steps away from Umbridge. "If you're embarrassed, Blaine?" Umbridge began, raising her brows with a pleasant smile, but she was interrupted before she could finish. "You mentioned you brought an order from the school board, so please proceed," Atticus said with a quiet smile. His expression seemed to ease the anger on the faces of the professors at the faculty table. Those familiar with Atticus knew his style. This senior deputy minister of the Ministry of Magic was likely up to something. "What could it be?" Ron asked, his face pale from the tense and confrontational atmosphere in the auditorium, yet he managed a smile. "What else?" Hermione replied sharply, glaring at Umbridge with disgust. "Oh, are you playing dumb, Blaine?" Umbridge covered her mouth, laughing. "Or are you afraid to face your own failure?" She pulled a piece of parchment from her pocket and unfolded it in front of Dumbledore and Atticus. "This is the appointment letter from the school board. Dumbledore, Blaine, and more than 2/3 of the board members have signed it." Umbridge looked up, her heavy eye bags quivering with laughter. "I have been appointed as the Professor of Defense Against the Dark Arts at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry." "Oh, what a pity." George Weasley's unrestrained voice caused a ripple of suppressed laughter. "This course has never appeared, and the professor was fired before even taking office." Umbridge, who had been shaking the appointment letter as if showing off, froze. She turned her head, glaring fiercely in the direction of the voice, but George stood his ground, looking at her fearlessly. To be honest, Atticus had not originally planned to handle it this way. He had intended to use legitimate reasons to directly reject this appointment, forcing the Ministry of Magic and the Board of Directors to reconsider. But seeing the arrogant and foolish woman before him, a hint of a sneer flashed in Atticus's lavender eyes. "I'm afraid you're not qualified to be my colleague, Umbridge." Atticus's stern voice startled her, but she quickly regained her composure, smiling even more fiercely. "You have no right to refuse, Blaine. The Board of Directors has issued the appointment letter. Hogwarts must follow the board's orders. Moreover, I think you may have forgotten, Blaine," Umbridge said sharply, You entered Hogwarts and became an investigator of the Chamber of Secrets because you received the appointment letter from the school board. Oh, of course, I won't forget, Atticus replied leisurely, glancing at Dumbledore. But becoming an inquisitor at Hogwarts requires more than just a letter of appointment from the board. You are still missing a set of formalities, Miss Umbridge. What is it? Umbridge glanced at Lucius, but he lowered his head, staring at his toes, offering no response to her questioning gaze. Realizing something was amiss, Umbridge asked with a frown. You still need to pass my interview, Miss Umbridge, Dumbledore stated coldly. I'm sorry, Miss Umbridge. Although you may be professional enough to serve the Minister of Magic, I don't believe you have the ability to teach young wizards. Umbridge frowned, ready to argue, but on the other side, seeing the trap had been set, Atticus smiled deeply and added, Unless you prove to us that you have the ability to teach young wizards, a letter of appointment alone will not secure you the position of Defense Against the Dark Arts professor. We all passed the principal's interview, Professor McGonagall interjected with a cold remark, her words triggering a series of nods from the faculty. The professors at the faculty table exchanged a series of statements, their voices rising and falling in a rhythm that seemed almost rehearsed. Without realizing it, the dynamics of the conversation shifted, and suddenly the roles of offense and defense were reversed. Umbridge found herself on the defensive, compelled to ask, How can I prove it? Atticus Blaine's smile held a trace of amusement, a subtle curve that hinted at his confidence. His gaze drifted leisurely around the auditorium, taking in the scene with a calm demeanor. His words, though softly spoken, ignited a spark in Harry, who was already simmering with anger. If you wish to teach students, Atticus began, his voice carrying a gentle yet undeniable authority, you must first demonstrate that you possess greater expertise than they do. Wouldn't you agree, Ms. Umbridge? End of this chapter. Chapter 16. Candidates. Prove that you are more professional than a student. Umbridge was momentarily taken aback. She turned to face the young wizards gathered in the hall below. Many of them wore defiant expressions, some openly displaying their anger towards her. However, a few wizards averted their eyes, guilt-ridden, likely because their parents worked at the Ministry of Magic and understood the repercussions of crossing her. So, you're suggesting that I'm no match for a group of young wizards who haven't even graduated, and that Atticus Blaine is incapable of teaching them. Is that it? She retorted. I would advise against underestimating these exceptional young people from Hogwarts. Atticus Blaine replied with a smile. These children may lack experience, Ms. Umbridge, Dumbledore added calmly, but they are undoubtedly full of energy. As Atticus mentioned, it would be unwise to underestimate them, and teaching them requires exceptional skill. The professors at the staff table puffed out their chests with pride, none of them offering Umbridge a friendly glance. The astute students had already anticipated what was about to unfold. Except for a few whose parents were employed by the ministry, the students in the physical education class were visibly excited. This was real combat. Since the introduction of the physical education class, Professor Blaine had been strict about their conduct. He prohibited them from fighting among themselves or using their wands during school conflicts. They had never had the opportunity to showcase their skills, but now they had a golden chance to do so against none other than the renowned senior deputy minister of the Ministry of Magic. Lucius Malfoy observed Umbridge, whose chest heaved with increasing rapidity, with a stern expression. He had already foreseen the possibility of Umbridge's downfall. Based on his practice sessions with Draco, if the students taught by Blaine could match Draco's level, they might defeat Umbridge individually, but they certainly wouldn't lose. If 2 or 3 of them teamed up, Umbridge would be overwhelmed. Lucius turned and shot a warning glare at Draco, who was also eager to participate. Umbridge was destined to lose, but whoever caused her defeat would undoubtedly face her wrathful revenge, and Lucius would not allow Draco to be the first to act. That's absurd. Unable to endure the insult, Umbridge glared fiercely at Atticus and shouted, You actually think I can't handle a few kids, Blaine? Oh, furry kid? Harry had already begun rolling up his sleeves, his green eyes fixed intently on Umbridge above the hall like a lone wolf. I want her to experience the power of a furry kid. If Professor Blaine doesn't choose me to participate, I'll never forgive him." "So, are you willing to give it a try, Madam Umbridge?" Atticus asked with a leisurely smile. "These kids usually practice in groups of 3, fighting as a team. Of course, this might not seem fair to you, so if you can hold out for more than a minute, I'll acknowledge your ability to teach young wizards." "Hold out for a minute?" Umbridge was so furious that her hair seemed to stand on end. She knew she was no match for Blaine, but for him to dismiss her magic so casually was intolerable. Even setting aside the animosity between the Ministry of Magic and Hogwarts, she couldn't stand for it. "Very well, Blaine, let's proceed as you suggest, and I'll demonstrate what a senior official of the Ministry of Magic is capable of," Umbridge declared in a sinister tone. "Oh, but you'd better have a stretcher ready." "Ah, that is indeed sound advice," Atticus replied with a smile, tilting his head to look at Madame Pomfrey. "Would you mind? Are you preparing a stretcher for Madame Umbridge, Madame Pomfrey?" The laughter of the young wizards reverberated through the auditorium, shaking the windows, and even many professors couldn't help but chuckle. Atticus Blaine ignored Umbridge's murderous glare and Dumbledore's subtle reminder to maintain control. With Umbridge's eyes fixed on, Atticus stepped out from behind the faculty table, clapped his hands twice, and the chaotic spread of food on the 4 long tables vanished instantly. The young wizards stood up, and the tables and benches in front of them began to float above their heads. After a series of intricate transformations, a massive stage descended to the ground. It was time to select an opponent for the senior undersecretary of the Ministry of Magic. The young wizards knew that Professor Blaine would likely choose from his physical education students, and indeed, Atticus intended to do just that. His discerning gaze swept over the crowd of students, considering the best performers from previous classes, such as Harry from Gryffindor, Cedric from Hufflepuff, and Draco from Slytherin. However, he dismissed them all for a simple reason. Umbridge would undoubtedly despise anyone who embarrassed her today. Cedric's father worked at the Ministry of Magic, and choosing Draco would be a trap for Lucius. As for Harry, Atticus noticed his eager eyes. Allowing Harry to participate could provoke Umbridge and push the Ministry to make a foolish move, but Atticus couldn't risk Harry losing control. Hermione Granger, Neville Longbottom, Luna Lovegood. Atticus's calm voice resonated throughout the auditorium, eliciting a mix of cheers and disgruntled shouts that made the chandeliers above clatter. "Quiet," Atticus commanded with authority, turning to face Umbridge, who glared at him icily. "These 3 students are my teaching assistants. They will be responsible for testing you." Umbridge's bulging eyes no longer showed anger but murderous intent. Without uttering a word, she drew her wand from her pink coat pocket and marched toward the stage. However, she faced a minor challenge. The stage Atticus had conjured was too high for her short, stocky frame. Unable to jump onto it, she had to use her wand to create a step from thin air, drawing derisive laughter from the young wizards, especially those in the physical education class. "If you can't bring her down in 10 seconds, Hermione," Harry, still seething, whispered to Hermione, "then I will." "Is that so, Harry?" Hermione replied, her expression icy yet composed. "You'll never copy my homework again?" Harry was left speechless. Shaking off Harry's hand, Hermione strode confidently toward the stage. She had anticipated being called upon by Professor Blaine and was mentally prepared. Professor Blaine aimed to teach Umbridge a lesson, but couldn't choose students who were too impulsive, like Harry, nor those with close ties to the Ministry. This effectively ruled out all the Slytherins. Among those capable and representative in physical education, Hermione, Neville, and Luna were the most suitable teaching assistants. "Hey, it's your turn, Neville," Ron said, pulling his envious gaze from Hermione's back and looking at Neville, who was nervously fiddling with something around his waist. In the past, Neville's confusion washed over Ron's face, causing him to subconsciously display a horrified expression. "You didn't lose your wand, did you?" "Oh, of course not," Neville replied, his voice tinged with relief. He rummaged through the bag beneath his wizard robe, and with a triumphant smile that differed from his usual lively grin, turned to his eager Gryffindor classmates. "Look, I'm going to cut her," he announced cheerfully. With newfound confidence, Neville strode towards the stage, his steps mirroring Hermione's as he approached with high spirits. He leaped onto the platform with ease. On the opposite side of the stage, Luna stood with a circle of butterbeer caps strung around her neck. Her intelligent silver eyes sparkled as she hummed a whimsical tune, bouncing lightly on her feet. She eagerly moved to join Hermione and Neville, her excitement palpable. End of this chapter. Chapter 117, Sense of Oppression. This is likely the first time in Hogwarts' 1,000-year history that such an event has occurred. It might sound peculiar and even absurd that 3 young wizards are competing against high-ranking officials from the Ministry of Magic in the Great Hall, yet it has captured everyone's attention. Even Professor McGonagall, known for her strict adherence to rules, did not object. Her only regret might be that she cannot personally teach this bothersome ministry official a lesson. None of the professors were concerned that the young wizards, trained by Atticus Blaine for a year, would be harmed by Umbridge. Although they hadn't participated in Blaine's training sessions, the professors frequently discussed their teaching experiences and had heard Blaine describe the capabilities of these young wizards. It is no exaggeration to say that even if the professors faced these students one-on-one, they would be at a disadvantage if they weren't careful. Now, with 3 students against 1 opponent, there was no cause for worry. "Hey, everyone, place your bets!" Fred exclaimed, pulling out a piece of parchment from his bag and eagerly addressing those around him. "If you bet the old toad can last a minute, the odds are 7 to 1. For 40 to 50 seconds, it's 5 to 1. 30 to 40 seconds, 3 to 1. And for 20 to 30 seconds, the odds are 9 to 1. A crowd gathered. Harry pulled out 7 or 8 galleons from his pocket and stuffed them into George's open cloth bag, gritting his teeth. "I bet she can only last 1 round. "Oh, you sly little fellow, looking to make a fortune, are you?" Fred grinned. "If it's under 10 seconds, we'll give you a 10 to 1 payout." "You're a bit impulsive, mate," Ron remarked, eyeing the handful of coins Harry tossed into the bag with regret. "No," Harry replied stubbornly. "I believe they can do it." Similar scenes unfolded throughout the Great Hall, with professors observing from the podium, choosing not to intervene. Umbridge's menacing expression failed to intimidate Hermione. Compared to a lively dragon, Umbridge was far less frightening. Neville, also under Umbridge's fierce gaze, appeared eager to fight, as if he couldn't wait to begin. "Even the Nargles don't like her," Luna said, shaking her dark golden hair, removing her wand from behind her ear, and gazing at Umbridge with her bright silver eyes, as if her words explained everything. "I will prove to you that the magic education you've received is completely wrong. Hogwarts urgently needs educational reform," Umbridge declared fiercely. Yet Hermione and her companions ignored her threats. In the brief moments before Professor Blaine began, they discussed their strategy. "I'll handle defense, Neville. You'll be the main attacker, and Luna, you'll support," Hermione instructed in a low voice. Her eyes narrowed. "That's fine with me, Hermione," Neville agreed with a grin. "Uh-huh," Luna responded with a soft hum. "So," Atticus Blaine raised his voice, looking pleased at the 3 young wizards who showed no signs of nervousness under the scrutiny of so many. "Are you ready?" Hermione tightened her grip on her wand. Luna twirled hers around her fingers, releasing a few sparkling silver stars, and Neville reached into his robe, ready to draw his wand at any moment. The 3 of them affirmed their readiness. "And you, Madam Umbridge?" Blaine asked with a faint smile. Had cast the protective spell with such precision and timing that it seemed almost effortless. Atticus Blaine watched the scene unfold with a calm demeanor, his eyes never leaving the duel. He knew the students were well prepared, having trained rigorously under his guidance. Miss Umbridge, he thought, underestimated them gravely. The auditorium was alive with anticipation, the air thick with the tension of the duel. The students' formation was impeccable, a testament to their teamwork and strategic planning. Hermione, with her sharp intellect, led the charge, her wand movements precise and deliberate. Neville, once timid, now exuded confidence, his spells powerful and unwavering. Luna, with her ethereal grace, moved like a shadow, her magic weaving seamlessly with her companions. The audience was captivated, their eyes darting between the duelists. Even the professors, seasoned in their own right, were impressed by the display of skill and coordination. Harry, standing among the spectators, couldn't help but feel a surge of pride for his friends. "They've come a long way," he murmured to himself, watching as they executed their strategy flawlessly. Umbridge, on the other hand, was visibly flustered. Her initial bravado had crumbled under the pressure of the students' relentless assault. She fired spell after spell, but each was deftly countered or deflected. Her frustration grew with each failed attempt, her composure slipping away. Atticus Blaine observed her struggle, noting the lack of finesse in her technique. "She's out of her depth," he mused, aware that her overconfidence had been her downfall. As the duel progressed, it became clear that the students were not just defending themselves, they were pushing Umbridge back, forcing her to retreat. The crowd erupted in cheers, their support for the young wizards palpable. In a final decisive move, Hermione, Neville, and Luna combined their magic, creating a dazzling display of light and energy that overwhelmed Umbridge's defenses. The spell hit its mark, and Umbridge was disarmed, her wand clattering to the floor. The auditorium fell silent for a moment, the outcome sinking in. Then, a wave of applause and cheers erupted, echoing off the walls. The students had not only defended themselves, but had done so with honor and skill. Atticus Blaine allowed himself a small smile, proud of their achievement. He knew that this victory was not just a personal triumph for the students, but a testament to the strength and unity of Hogwarts itself. Atticus Blaine had just cast the shield charm. With only 3 seconds remaining before the competition officially began, the 3 young wizards from Hogwarts had already covered half the distance between the two sides. The overwhelming sense of pressure gnawed at Umbridge's nerves. She couldn't fathom why 3 seemingly reckless children charging towards her could instill such fear. Perhaps the stress had unlocked her latent potential. In a flurry, Umbridge cast 3 spells in quick succession, 2 aimed at Hermione and 1 at Luna. "Attack!" Hermione's clear voice rang out as she tracked the trajectory of the incoming spells. In that decisive moment, she and Neville executed a swift maneuver, crossing each other's paths. Neville veered to the left, advancing in a wide arc, while Hermione positioned herself in front of Luna, deftly deflecting the curse aimed at her. Using Hermione's body as a temporary shield, Luna vanished briefly from Umbridge's view. With a flick of her wrist, she sent several silver notes whistling sharply through the air, arcing towards Umbridge's left side. Simultaneously, Luna and Hermione accelerated, moving in a coordinated arc to flank Umbridge from the left. "Protego!" Umbridge shrieked, raising her wand. The approaching musical notes and the sight of the young witches flanking her from the left drew her attention and body in that direction. Clang! Just as she began to feel a sense of relief at having blocked the musical notes, a sharp sound erupted from her right blind spot, causing her expression to change instantly. End of this chapter. Chapter 18, Expectation Clang. A clear, resonant sound echoed throughout the auditorium. In full view of everyone, Neville leaped up with a determined expression and unsheathed a sword from his waist. It was a simple sword, devoid of any ornate carvings, yet its edge gleamed with a cold, sharp light. Under the sunlight, the blade emitted a radiant glow, akin to a holy light. In that moment, time seemed to stretch. Almost all the young wizards wore incredulous expressions as Neville brandished his sword. The students stared at him, most of them convinced that Neville had lost his mind. Before this school year, if the students had been asked to choose the weakest, most inept student from Gryffindor, Neville would have undoubtedly been elected with a landslide vote. Even Neville himself might have nominated himself. However, since the beginning of this semester, or more precisely, since the incident when Hermione Granger was attacked and hospitalized, Neville had changed. After returning from a trip outside the school with Professor Dumbledore, he was different. His return surprised everyone. The timid shadow of his past was gone. The former laughingstock of Gryffindor had transformed through some unknown process, becoming confident and optimistic. Those close to him understood the reasons behind Neville's drastic change. If it had been the old Neville, Harry would have been uneasy about Professor Blaine sending him into the field, despite Neville's improved performance in physical education classes. But with Neville's newfound confidence and a hint of Fred and George's daring, He excelled in all aspects of training. Therefore, when Professor Blaine appointed Neville, Harry didn't question it. However, when Neville drew a silver sword, typically reserved for the castle's armor displays, Harry's composure shattered. Was Neville out of his mind? Harry stared at Neville, who soared into the air with a calm and composed demeanor, his mind racing. This was a prime opportunity to defend the honor of Hogwarts and Gryffindor and to challenge the Ministry of Magic's authority. Why was Neville acting foolishly now? Draco, too, watched Neville Longbottom in astonishment. Unlike Harry, he didn't think Neville was being foolish. He recalled the days when Hermione Granger had just been chosen as the champion, and with his tacit approval, Pansy had played some pranks on her. This provoked a fierce reaction from Neville during physical education class. At that time, Neville had drawn a sword from the classroom's armor and pointed it at him. It seemed like a comical gesture, but Draco remembered feeling an unusual sharpness in Neville's actions. Draco glanced at Professor Blaine, seated above the auditorium, and saw a calm, unsurprised expression. Professor Blaine had witnessed Neville's sword-drawing incident during physical education class, so perhaps Longbottom's change in demeanor was at Professor Blaine's suggestion? The faculty and staff of Hogwarts were equally shocked. Perhaps only Dumbledore felt the depth of the moment. His deep blue eyes reflected not only astonishment at Neville's actions, but also an unusual sharpness. Godric Gryffindor's sword hung in his office, a magical weapon he knew well. Yet at this moment, he sensed the same aura emanating from the sword Neville held as from the sword of Gryffindor. As Neville reached the highest point, he raised his sword high, preparing to strike with a dazzling white light. Atticus Blaine was caught off guard by the fierce and relentless attack from the three young wizards of Hogwarts. He turned back in fear, witnessing Neville Longbottom brandishing a gleaming silver sword high above his head. Dolores Umbridge, already panicking at the thought of being attacked, was momentarily bewildered by the sight. However, her confusion quickly turned into a grim smile. A mere child wielding a sword? The absurdity almost made her laugh, and the levity of the moment gave her a false sense of security. She gritted her teeth, realizing she had no time to counterattack. Her wand, now poised defensively, glowed with a deep blue light. Time resumed its normal pace. Neville let out a loud shout, having practiced privately for a long time to adapt to the speed at which Mithril absorbed magical energy. He relinquished control over his magic, allowing it to flow endlessly into the silver sword. With the infusion of magic, the sword in Neville's hand was enveloped in a radiant light, as if he were holding a luminous moon. The collision of silver and blue light was indescribably brilliant. Umbridge's ferocious expression froze at the moment of impact. Her eyes, swollen with fatigue, filled with fear. In that split second, she felt an overwhelming force crushing her magic. Even after her magic dissipated, the power remained potent, surging into her wand, which transmitted pain and distress back to her. With a resounding snap, Umbridge watched helplessly as her wand shattered into pieces under the onslaught of the silver-white light. Before she could even cry out in anguish, the force of the explosion sent her hurtling through the air, crashing into a massive pillar in the hall. Dumbledore, with a swift gesture, raised a finger, and Umbridge's body, mid-flight, suddenly hovered in the air. Fear and unspeakable shame gnawed at her heart like a venomous serpent. She glared at Atticus Blaine and Dumbledore with hatred, then rolled her eyes and forced herself to faint. The young wizards watched as Umbridge slowly descended to the ground, lying motionless. The silence that followed seemed to stretch on forever until it was shattered by a chorus of cheers and roars. Every young wizard was celebrating, and even the faculty joined in, applauding the three young wizards. This is going to be remembered as a great duel. Professor Flitwick exclaimed, leaping onto the stage with his arms raised high. "Oh, that's amazing! Such perfect cooperation. Even in my youth, I couldn't have managed that. Well done, Luna." "She shouldn't have been saved," Harry shouted. "She should have been allowed to crash into it and spend a few more months in St. Mungo's. Oh, this sword is magnificent, Neville. I'm impressed." Harry showed his watch to Fred and George. "Less than 10 seconds. See? I knew it." But Fred and George ignored him, rushing onto the stage with the other young wizards to embrace Neville, Hermione, and Luna. "It's incredible," Professor McGonagall said, wiping her eyes with joy. "Mr. Longbottom, that final strike was truly powerful. It embodies the spirit of Gryffindor. Is it inappropriate to award points now?" At least 200 young wizards surged onto the stage, surrounding Neville, Hermione, and Luna, cheering and praising them. The scene was a rare spectacle of celebration. "See, Professor Blaine!" Neville, amidst the throng, held the sword of Gryffindor aloft. Standing on tiptoe, he called out to the smiling Atticus Blaine at the staff table, "I can handle it, Professor." But the young wizards surrounding Neville couldn't contain their excitement. They joyfully lifted Neville into the air, celebrating his triumph. Meanwhile, Dumbledore turned to Atticus Blaine and asked softly, "So, the sword in Mr. Ray Longbottom's hand came from you, Atticus?" Atticus responded with a calm smile. "Yes, indeed. The sword was a relic from my early explorations of ancient ruins. It would have been wasted in my possession. I noticed that Mr. Longbottom seemed to have a natural affinity for it, so I encouraged him to follow in the footsteps of Godric Gryffindor." Dumbledore sighed inwardly, choosing not to press further. He then addressed Madame Pomfrey. "Poppy, could you please attend to Umbridge? Despite the circumstances, Hogwarts cannot overlook this incident." Though clearly reluctant, Madame Pomfrey complied with the request. As Umbridge was carried away on a stretcher, Lucius watched with a look of pity in his deep-set eyes. Under the composed gazes of Atticus and Dumbledore, Lucius approached them. "We'll have to see if the school board will overlook today's events. Hogwarts may pay dearly for its perceived arrogance," Lucius remarked. Atticus replied with a cold smile, "I suppose so. I've been anticipating this for quite some time." End of this chapter. Chapter 10-19, Late Night Visit. "Are you ready, Neville?" The warm air of the Gryffindor dormitory was filled with anticipation as a practice duel unfolded. The four-poster beds, tables, chairs, and benches had been pushed against the walls, creating an open space in the center of the room. Seamus, Dean, and Ron stood by their desks, their eyes fixed with interest on Neville and Harry, who faced each other in the middle of the room. Harry and Neville stood 20 feet apart, one wielding a staff and the other a sword, their expressions serious. Strictly speaking, this wasn't a duel, it was more of a practice session. The ironclad rule set by Professor Blaine prohibited students from dueling with wands privately during physical education classes. However, Neville, who had recently distinguished himself in a battle for Hogwarts, had earned some privileges from Professor Blaine. He had persuaded the professor to allow him to practice with someone to master his special wand more quickly. After careful consideration, Atticus Blaine agreed to Neville's request but imposed strict rules. During practice, both participants could only choose to attack or defend unilaterally, ensuring risk control. As for the sparring partner, Atticus and Neville had chosen Harry. The decision was simple. Harry and Neville were both physical education students, shared the same dormitory, and had a strong friendship. They knew how to handle themselves and wouldn't get upset over minor accidents. Another reason for selecting a fixed sparring partner was to prevent Neville from causing trouble in the castle under the guise of practice. As a result, Neville and Harry's sparring sessions became a nightly spectacle for Gryffindor students. Before the scheduled rest time, the young wizards would clamor for Neville and Harry to put on a show in the common room. The two, full of energy, were equally enthusiastic about the competition. Thus, even on the Monday after Neville showcased his new tactics in the Great Hall, they engaged in some light exercise upon returning to the dormitory. Neville took a deep breath, exhaling slowly as he lowered his body slightly. His hawk-like eyes were fixed on Harry's eyes, shoulders, wrists, and other key points. "Come on, Harry, I'm ready," Neville declared, gripping the sword with both hands, the tip resting on the ground beside him, his eyes blazing with determination. Hearing this, Harry's lips curled into a smile, his green eyes sparkling with excitement. This wasn't a formal duel, so there was no need for elaborate fights or confrontations. With a swift motion, Harry's half-raised arm thrust forward, and with a flick of his wrist, a brilliant red light, as thick as a child's wrist, shot out in an instant. The force of the spell sent the curtains of the four-poster bed fluttering. Dean and Seamus gasped at the power of the disarming charm. Even Ron, who was familiar with the training, turned pale. He couldn't guarantee that his shield charm would withstand Harry's potent spell. However, Neville was different. Despite the ferocity and speed of Harry's attack, Neville anticipated his movements. He knew that the incoming spell was Harry's signature disarming charm. With a swift motion, Neville twisted from his waist, the sword tip tracing a crescent silver arc through the dark air, meeting Harry's spell with precision. Boom! A slight explosion followed, and the red light of the disarming charm shattered into a cascade of beautiful red sparks. Crisp and beautiful. Everyone watching the practice in the dormitory, including Harry, was captivated by the display. Taken the initiative to come to Harry Potter with urgent news. The voice was unmistakably that of Dobby, the house elf, and it was enough to rouse Harry from his slumber. He blinked a few times, trying to shake off the remnants of sleep, and finally sat up, clutching the quilt around his shoulders. "Dobby?" Harry asked, his voice still thick with sleep. "What's going on? Why are you here?" "Dobby is very sorry, sir," the house elf replied, his large eyes filled with a mix of urgency and apology. "But Dobby has important information for Harry Potter. It cannot wait." Harry rubbed his eyes again, trying to focus. All right, he said, stifling a yawn. "What is it?" "Dobby has heard things, sir," the elf whispered, glancing around as if to ensure they were not overheard. "Things about Atticus Blaine. Dobby thought Harry Potter should know." The mention of Atticus Blaine piqued Harry's interest. Atticus was a mysterious figure, often shrouded in rumors and intrigue. "What about him?" Harry asked, now fully awake. "Dobby cannot say much here, sir," the elf replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "But Dobby knows that Atticus Blaine is planning something big. Dobby overheard it in the kitchens." Harry's mind raced. Atticus Blaine was known for his cunning and resourcefulness, and if he was indeed planning something significant, it could mean trouble. "All right, Dobby," Harry said, his tone serious. "Thank you for telling me. I'll look into it." "Dobby is always here to help Harry Potter," the elf said earnestly, his eyes wide with sincerity. "If Harry Potter needs anything, Dobby will be there." With this, Dobby gave a small bow and disappeared with a soft pop, leaving Harry alone in the dimly lit dormitory. The room was quiet, save for the gentle snores of his sleeping friends. Harry lay back down, his mind now too active to return to sleep easily. He stared at the ceiling, contemplating Dobby's warning and what it might mean for him and his friends. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the window, Harry resolved to speak with Ron, Hermione, and the others about Dobby's message. Whatever Atticus Blaine was planning, they needed to be prepared. With a determined sigh, Harry finally closed his eyes, hoping to catch a few more moments of rest before the day began in earnest. Harry covered his eyes with his arms, trying to make sense of the words that echoed in his still groggy mind. "More than," he pondered. After a few moments, he suddenly sat up in bed. The moonlight streaming into the room revealed two small, shadowy figures beside him. Startled, Harry quickly reached for his glasses and squinted to get a better look. "Oh, Dobby! And Winky!" he exclaimed in surprise. The dark room and the impatient murmurs from the other beds reminded him that it was still the middle of the night. Lowering his voice, he asked, "Dobby, Winky, what brings you here at this hour?" Relieved that Harry wasn't upset about being woken up, Dobby relaxed. The two house elves exchanged a glance, then stepped aside to reveal a pile of boxes at the foot of Harry's bed. End of this chapter. Chapter 1020, Crisis. In the dormitory, illuminated only by the faint starlight, Atticus Blaine stared at the pile of boxes. After a long moment, he turned his attention to the two house elves standing by the window. Dobby looked just as he had the previous school year, exuding a unique style reminiscent of a rock-and-roll hippie from the Muggle world. Winky, on the other hand, was a surprise. Atticus realized he hadn't thought to visit her and express his gratitude after returning from that dreadful graveyard. Yet the Winky before him seemed in much better condition than when he last saw her in the Hogwarts kitchen. She wore a tea towel adorned with the Hogwarts crest, and although she didn't appear particularly lively, one couldn't expect too much. After all, she had witnessed the tragic demise of her beloved master's family during Voldemort's resurrection. Old Barty was forced to commit suicide by Voldemort, while young Barty met his end at the hands of Professor Blaine. To be honest, Atticus was surprised Winky hadn't gone mad from the ordeal. Atticus resisted the urge to ask Winky how she was doing, not wanting to upset the poor elf. Instead, he turned his gaze back to the boxes stacked beside his bed. His nostrils twitched as he caught a whiff of a sweet fragrance. "You brought me some food, didn't you?" Atticus asked hesitantly. It seemed absurd that two house elves would wake him in the middle of the night just to deliver food. "Dobby, can you show something to Atticus Blaine?" Dobby asked cautiously. Winky also prepared some for the great Atticus Blaine, Winky said, blinking her tennis ball-sized eyes and looking at Atticus timidly. "Thank you, Atticus Blaine, for saving Winky from the Dark Lord." "Oh, you're welcome, Winky. You know it wasn't me who saved you." "Oh, don't mention that," Atticus replied, holding his forehead. Although he still didn't fully understand the situation, he nodded. The two elves sprang into action, opening the largest box first. In the starlight, Atticus saw a very large double-layer cake, reminiscent of a birthday cake. However, there were no words like "Happy Birthday, Atticus Blaine" written on it with jam, only a thick layer of cream. The remaining boxes were filled with various foods: pies of different flavors, roasted sausages, smoked bacon, and boiled potatoes. One box even contained more than 30 boiled eggs. "Well," Ron suddenly sat up from his bed, his eyes still closed but his nose sniffing the air. "Are you eating secretly, Atticus?" Ron asked in a mumbled voice, his face aimed at Atticus. "No," Atticus whispered, worried about waking the others. "You must be dreaming, Ron." "Oh, I think so." "You can't have a secret meal without me," Ron said, then fell back onto the bed with a thud, turned over, and fell asleep again. A moment later, Atticus heard Ron grinding his teeth. "I think you're mistaken, Dobby. Oh, and Winky?" Atticus turned back to the big cake with a puzzled look. "My birthday is on the last day of July." "Well, of course, I am very grateful to you." "That's not a mistake." Dobby's big eyes sparkled in the dark dormitory, but his expression was full of melancholy. "Dobby knows when Atticus Blaine's birthday is, sir. How could Dobby be wrong? But this is not to celebrate Atticus Blaine's birthday." "Not to celebrate my birthday?" Atticus asked. The two elves nodded in unison, looking into Atticus's eyes. It was just in case. When Dobby and Winky found out about this, they immediately made a decision. Atticus Blaine couldn't go to class hungry if Hogwarts could still provide magical education. Starving at Hogwarts, and no more teaching at Hogwarts? Atticus shook his head to ensure he wasn't too sleepy and misunderstood what Winky said. Dobby and Winky. Atticus sat on the edge of his bed, trying to comprehend the situation. Harry lay in bed, feeling waves of sleepiness wash over him. Tomorrow wasn't a day off, and the first class was potions. He knew that if he fell asleep in Snape's class, he'd be in serious trouble. "I'd love to chat more, but I have classes tomorrow. If you need to tell me something, please be clear," he said, looking at Dobby and Winky expectantly. The two house elves exchanged serious glances. "Harry Potter, there is a crisis at Hogwarts, sir," Dobby said, his small face earnest. "Just like when the Chamber of Secrets was opened, a very serious crisis." Harry's scattered thoughts quickly focused, and his green eyes sparkled with alertness. He remembered how Dobby, back when he served Lucius Malfoy, had warned him about the Chamber of Secrets. Although the situation had turned out differently than Dobby had anticipated, his warning hadn't been without merit. "What is it, Dobby, Winky? Have you heard something again? Tell me," Harry urged, leaning forward with a serious expression. But neither Dobby nor Winky answered directly. Dobby shrugged. "I can't tell you, Harry Potter. The great Mr. Atticus Blaine and Professor McGonagall came to the kitchen and told us not to worry the students. Professor Blaine is doing his best to solve the problem. I even offered to stop my salary, but Professor Blaine disagreed." Harry listened intently, but Winky, more cautious, reminded him, "We cannot disobey Professor Blaine's orders." Dobby, usually rebellious, remained silent this time. "Dobby is leaving, sir," he said after a pause, bowing deeply. "Dobby and Winky still have to clean the castle and do the laundry for the students. These foods are to keep Harry Potter from starving. You can share them with your friends. We've used magic on them, so they can be stored for a long time." Winky also bowed, and with a few crisp sounds, the two elves vanished, leaving Harry sitting on his bed, staring at the pile of food. What exactly was going on? In the darkness, Harry silently questioned himself. Unfortunately, this kind of analytical work wasn't his strength. It was Hermione's. He decided it was time to put on the invisibility cloak and head to the kitchen. Dobby and Winky had mentioned cleaning the castle, and he doubted any other elf would be willing to tell him the truth. But a crisis at Hogwarts, comparable to the Chamber of Secrets? It reminded him of the recent incident when Umbridge and Lucius Malfoy attempted a coup at Hogwarts, only to fail. Harry knew the Ministry of Magic and the Malfoy-controlled board wouldn't take that humiliation lightly. Revenge seemed likely. Harry got out of bed, covered the food with a robe, and pushed it under the bed. He climbed back onto the bed, thinking that Sirius would surely know more about the situation. The family is also represented on the board of directors, so regardless of what Malfoy does to harm Hogwarts, Sirius is bound to be aware of it, even if he can't prevent it. However, consulting Sirius isn't essential at this point. Since there are already hints of a conspiracy, the truth may reveal itself as soon as tomorrow. "Let's hear Hermione's thoughts first," Harry murmured, before quickly drifting off to sleep under the starlit sky in the latter half of the night. End of this chapter.